Good morning. Welcome, folks, to the November 2022 FMDiSC meeting. I'm Bob Shockey, and I'm your host for today. Today we have an interview with Marc and Keith Larochelle from Productive Computing, some info on Claris Studio Security from Wim Decorte of Soliant, and then later Dave Knight of Angel City Data will be sharing some of the results, not all of the results, from the survey that you've hopefully filled out by now. And then after this first interview, we're going to be breaking out into breakout rooms for conversation and socializing. And when we return from that, there'll be some important announcements that you're not going to want to miss. And if anyone here has an announcement they would like to make, just send me a private message here on Zoom, and I'll fit you in. We ask during the presentations that you mute your microphone so that you don't inadvertently interrupt the speakers. If you want to comment or ask a question, an easy way to do that is just hit your space bar while you're holding it down. You're temporarily unmuted, and when you let it off, you'll be back to being muted again. So that's a good way to go with that. And that way you don't forget and leave yourself unmuted and inadvertently cause problems and background noise and so forth. So please mute yourselves now if you're not muted already. And let me introduce our first guests. These are the founders of San Diego's Productive Computing, the Larochelle Brothers. Most of you here, I think, know them. And but there's probably a lot of things you don't know. So let's see what we can find out today. Marc, Keith, thank you both for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Glad to be here, for sure.
It's our pleasure.
Great. Well, I want to start off with an easy one, kind of a fun one. You both have an avid interest in fast cars. Where and when did that start?
I'll let Keith tell the story, because it all started way back when we were kids with go-karts, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I should have prepared some pictures for it. Yeah, we've always liked go-karts. I especially. Maybe I was 9 or 10, and I borrowed some money from my parents, and I bought a Don the Snake Prudhomme go-kart from probably 1979. It was built, and they had a series of these go-karts. Anyway, we have a little small plot of land in the back of our yard with a bunch of trees on it. I cut a bunch of trees down, and I built myself a little race course, and I would do that incessantly. Occasionally, my parents would catch me on the street driving the go-kart around, which was illegal. But that's where my passion for driving fast started. And then it progressed. Every car I've had, my very first car was a 1979 280ZX, Datsun 280ZX, and almost every car with the exception of a Hyundai Sonata, which I hated. And I got that when I had my first child because I thought that was the responsible thing to do. And then I morphed from that into an SUV, which was a little bit more interesting. Anyway, I've had cars ever since that were sporty. I'll call them sporty.
And my story is a little different. For me, yes, I
wait. Let me first ask, did you have a mongoose go-kart? Because it was Don Prudhomme, this was the snake, and then I can't remember his name, was the mongoose, and they were always competing with one another, right?
I don't remember sort of racing from that era, but it wasn't a mongoose. It was definitely the snake's car. I wish I had a picture of it. You can Google it. It was a fun little go-kart.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt it.
Oh, no problem. So the way it worked is because it was Keith's car, I had to kind of ask him permission to drive it. And he was really reluctant to ever let me even use it here and there, but I managed to get on it a few times. But for me, it was like, okay, that was fun, but it was never really part of me. And I really wasn't into cars and really am not into cars, believe it or not. Well, you'll hear the whole story, but in fact, during college, I was borrowing my parents' car, which was, a Dodge minivan with the authentic wood grain paneling on the side. I had to drive that through college, but I was happy to do it because it was prudent and it made sense and it was basic transportation. So I wasn't really into cars the way Keith was. It wasn't until much later where I'll let him tell you the story of his first real car and his real fancy car, and then how he got me into it.
Yeah, so I had a colleague of mine in the Porsche Club here in San Diego, a business colleague, And I had just purchased maybe 10 or 11 months before a Lotus Exige S240, which is kind of like a road going go-kart. It's a no frills sports car, not a very expensive sports car, but as I progressed through my cars over the years, that was the next one in the progression. And anyway, she told me that she had just attended an event at the Porsche Club where they do a performance driving school. I said, "Oh wow, that's great! I'd love to attend that." But you had to be a Porsche member to attend, and of course I wasn't, and I didn't have a Porsche to become a member, which is one of the requirements. So I talked to the chief driving instructor at the club, and I said, "Boy, I'm really enthusiastic. I'd love to do this. I've got a great car for it. How do I do it?" And he says, "Well, I didn't tell you, but you can go to a junkyard, get a VIN off of a crashed Porsche to get your membership card. And once you do that, you can attend the class." And so that's what I did. I called up a couple of junkyards in LA and got my membership card, and I attended the class. And from that moment forward, I really fell in love with actually performance driving as opposed to just really enjoying the cars themselves. And I became skilled at it. I dragged my brother into it. We both became instructors within the club. And I still enjoy it, not so much after COVID, because that sort of shut down a lot of events like everything else, but I'm starting to get back into it now with the various clubs and various racing events. And it was a great opportunity to, again, like we were talking earlier before the meeting started, to hone these technical skills that had nothing to do with your profession that you do all day long. It is definitely a skill that you have to hone. When my very first race, I had this tremendous car that could be top 10 cars every race, and I came in dead last for that particular day. So it's something that you have to hone. It was something I brought my brother in. We shared it for a great number of years, competing with one another, learning from one another, and it was just a tremendous experience.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun.
So just to recap on that, when we decided to buy Corvettes together. So we bought them together and we picked them up at the factory in Kentucky and drove them back cross country. And these were brand new Corvettes, and most people hadn't even seen them in person. So wherever we went, whether it was a gas station or a parking lot somewhere, it would be a great attention getter, and people would be like, "Wow, I've never seen this." To see one, let alone two, and "Oh, you guys are brothers," and all that. So then we stopped in a place just outside of Las Vegas where GM has their official Corvette school, their driving school for both enthusiastic customers as well as employees. And when we got there, of course, they were excited because they hadn't seen the new Corvette yet either. So he says, "Wait right here, guys. Let me get my photographer, my marketing person." So they took pictures of us in the cars, and we ended up having a whole article written in Corvette magazine because they were just so charmed by these younger brothers getting into brand new Corvettes, because GM really wanted to change the face of Corvette and attract new and up and coming drivers and customers. So we became sort of a poster child for that whole trip that we took and the brother thing. And so that was, again, another remarkable shared experience with Keith.
That was really a bucket list experience for me.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Ever since we were kids, we always say, "Oh, imagine having fancy cars and driving them cross country." And it was, just a pipe dream.
We talked about that.
Yeah, when you're kids, you just think about that's a total pipe dream, and then it can become a reality. It's never exactly how you pictured it, but it was just great. Keith and I get along really well. That's the thing that surprises most people, is that, wow, you guys are brothers and you have this business together. And prior to COVID, we were in the same office working together. We'd have lunch every day together as a way of touching base. And, I think the key behind that is you have to learn how to be brothers as well as business partners all in one shot, which I think is something that, it's taken us years to learn, but once you get it.
I'm still working on it.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, well, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. So, most people would say that working with family can be hard. It's a whole different ballgame when you're working with someone who's actually literally family. How do you handle disagreements? I mean, do you guys ever you ever fight like brothers?
Do we ever fight like brothers? Not in front of people. It's 99 times out of 100 that'll be just on sort of an executive call between he and I or something like that. Marc is definitely more even-tempered. patient person. I'm much more, I don't know. How would you describe me, Marc?
I don't know if there is a word to describe.
Intense, maybe.
Yeah, intense is good. Yeah, you can be intense at times. Yeah, that's
the
for sure.
firebrand in the family.
Yeah. He gets emboldened and impassioned by several topics, and
I can be a dog with a bone.
Yeah, the story goes, well, when it comes to us getting along, I think the key to the success of that is the fact that first of all, we love each other. We're brothers. We do, that goes deep. There's really no resentment or anything like that, which a lot of family members do have those problems from childhood. So I hear so many times, oh, I could never work with my brother. I could never work with my sister. I could never work with my wife even, I hear that a lot. But for us, it starts with love. Then second is mutual respect. And the third thing is learning the other person's button and not push it, or at least not push it often. Sometimes it's fun to just push it. Yeah.
And you've been doing this for a long time, though. You are one of the, I would say, flagship businesses certainly in our Southern California area. I think you were one of the first businesses to start up around the FileMaker brand. How long? When were you founded?
So I started in FileMaker 1991 as a developer working full-time for a nonprofit association, NAM, National Association of Music Merchants. That's where I started. I started as an intern. I was 22 years old, and they handed me 3 discs that said FileMaker 2 on them. So I installed it on my Mac. What was it? It was a Macintosh computer, the 9-inch screen, black and white, or maybe it was color by then. And that's it. That was my internship. Install this program and create this directory. And from there, I created the directory. I learned what sub-summaries were. I thought sub-summaries were the coolest thing ever because it was just like magic. Like, okay, I can just put this here and magically it adds up. How can that be? So I learned that in 91, and I worked there for 5 years as an employee full-time in a company. And then I got itchy to want to do more. So I started teaching computers at night and on the weekends, got a bunch of customers. And then Keith joined us in 1996. He moved out to California. We're both from New Hampshire. And from there, we founded the business in 96 and we incorporated in 98.
Okay. It's in 98. Okay. And Keith, you came into the picture around then. That was in 98 when you went into business together.
Well, I actually arrived in California in 1995 in the summer. I did an internship at NAM. Marc was still working at NAM. I interned with NAM. We both have music business degrees, and that was the final component of our degrees. In any case, we had been talking prior to that about, boy, it'd really be great to start a business together and this sort of thing. Marc already had clients on the side while he was working at NAM. And then when I completed my internship in 1996, so I started in 95, finished it in 96, that is when Marc had enough clients to go out on his own full time. And I was living with him at the time. We were sharing an apartment, and I didn't have any responsibilities other than myself. So we decided to sort of work together. And we had two separate books, two separate everything. And Marc actually tells this story pretty well. So why don't you just kind of touch on that, how we went from separate entities in 96, sort of collaborating, to incorporating under the same brand in 98.
Right. So here we are sharing this little 600 square foot apartment. It was something really small. It was basically a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 living room, shared kitchen in California. And I had a bunch of, Keith's right, I had a bunch of customers, enough to survive on, and Keith had just moved out. So he had maybe 1 or 2 leads.
Yeah, whatever scraps fell from you.
Whatever scraps I could give him, right. And his skills were Windows and HTML. My skills were Macintosh and FileMaker. So Keith didn't really know FileMaker from the beginning. So we figured, oh, the 2 of us will cover all the bases. Well, the truth is I had a lot more work than he did, and I was really busy and he really wasn't. So I always had this idea that, well, if I give him a customer, is he going to treat him the same way as I do? And I was kind of stingy about it, really, to be honest with you. And I was protective because I had worked for so long by myself, and I'm sort of a loner anyway, that I was protective, and he could sense that. And at one point it came to a head and it really started to boil over, and he got frustrated. And he met me in the middle of the hallway and grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me and yelled and said, "We're either doing this together or we're not doing it at all." And he was livid. And that really woke me up. That made me realize that, wow, he's serious, and he just doesn't want this to be a side thing. He wants it to be a real thing.
I was trying to convince him that, 1 + 1 = 3. It's not just 1 + 1 = 2, or, and I was fully convinced of that.
So I went back to my room and I was really shaken up about that whole thing. And I just decided pretty much overnight, okay, let's join the books. Let's make it one company. We'll share everything. And, I remember thinking to myself, wow, I was making full-time income by myself. Now with my brother having to share all this, I'm kind of starting over again. So it was several years of working together before the revenue matched what I was making by myself, because obviously we have to split things. But then at that point, I realized, wow, I don't have to work 80 hours a week to make that same income, because, we'll take on employees and all this. So it was really magic joining Keith. And I am convinced, as much as he's convinced that 1 + 1 = 3, I'm convinced that if it wasn't for Keith, I'd be a happy solopreneur. And there are days that I sometimes wish I was a solopreneur.
Instead of a miserable entrepreneur.
Right. But most days I'm very happy to have Keith as a partner, and have a partnership, and have a business with employees, and have the scope and the kind of work and opportunities that we have. But I'm not going to lie to you guys. There are some days where you wish you could just be.
It's a tough gig, you guys know.
Yeah, judge, jury, and executioner all in one, with no one to talk to, no responsibilities other than, what you and your customers and Uncle Sam say you need to do. So
how long was it before you took on employees after you started the company?
So we started getting serious in 96. In 98, we took on our first employee. And that's when we incorporated. And that's also when we became, I believe that's when we became platinum partners as well. And at that point, we took on employees. We were working out of the house for a few months, if memory serves. And then we moved to an office in San Marcos, and then started taking on more employees and making it, more sophisticated, more scientific, and more professional, dare I say. And that's when things started really taking off for us.
Right, got heavy into products and plugins and that sort of thing.
Right. It was 98 that we released the Changepreneur plugin, which was our first plugin. And it was
a lot happened in 98.
Yeah, that's true.
Now I don't know about you guys. When I took on my very first employee, I was terrified. Was that like a big hurdle for you at all? Like, just thinking about being responsible for someone else's livelihood and so forth?
For me, it didn't feel, the moment that Keith and I were partners and then we made that decision was the moment that every decision becomes less burdensome, because you feel like you're not the only person holding up the cart. You've got a partner there holding up their end of the deal. So no, employees didn't scare me as much as it might have been if I was the only guy. So for me, that's how I felt. I don't know how Keith felt about taking on employees. I can imagine what he would say.
So the way the half that I bring to the partnership, I think, is, for better or for worse, I often charge into rooms where angels fear to tread, for better or worse, and don't think, I'm only considering sort of the positive outcomes. Marc brings the sort of the tempered, well, have you thought about this, and this that could go wrong? And then I say, oh yeah, babe, better plan for all those things too. So for me, it was just another step in the evolution of how do we grow this thing beyond he and I.
So Keith, were you fearful when we took on our first employee?
There's a certain level of fear whenever you do something for the very first time, right? There's an awful lot to learn. So I think from that point, I probably was, but not so much that it would prevent me from driving forward.
And how many employees do you have today?
There's 19 of us, including Marc and I.
That's a pretty good sized team.
Yeah.
It's a lot of mouths to feed.
Yeah. I was about to say that. A lot of mouths to feed. So, you have to balance that. And it's tough because our business, there's so many different types of revenue streams and so many different ways you have to produce that. Because you've got the custom dev, which requires really, really advanced skilled developers to be able to consult, to estimate, to plan and architecture things correctly, and then to deliver on those really complicated promises that's one of the hardest things we do in our company. So that's one part of our business. And then we have hosting, which is another part of our business, which requires a different skill set. And that in that respect, it's more IT, customer support, 24/7 service, all of those things come into play, which is a different skill set than custom dev. And then when you talk about creating products like plugins, which are, for the most part, C++ developed applications that are compiled and bound into a version, that's a different way to deliver products and services, completely different than custom dev and completely different than hosting. And then I guess our most recent thing which is education, Productive Computing University, which started in 2018. That is more of a passion project for us because, we've got all this accumulated knowledge in so many areas. Why not bring that to the community? So for the most part, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's 19 people, but each one kind of wears a different hat, supporting a different type of customer and a different type of product and service.
Almost like 3 or 4 different companies too.
Right.
And that's how we've organized it, and that's how we run it too.
Right. Yeah. Everything is departmental, and I'm not going to say that the departments don't talk to each other, but they talk to each other a lot less than you'd think. The products team and the hosting team and the custom dev team and now our maintenance team, those are really different teams, and they work independent of each other. We are tied, but it is like running 3 or 4 different companies. And I know I couldn't do it as easily without a partner, and especially a trusted partner like a brother. So I think for us, we have an unfair advantage over other people who don't either have a partnership or have a really key person in their organization that they can trust to burden, all the other ownership responsibilities.
Yeah. But I am definitely the lazier of the 2 brothers. There's no doubt about that.
Well, but he's efficient, so we'll give him that.
Well, so how much of your time you get to spend on like vision, on big picture things versus just everyday execution and management? Do you 2 divide that up between you as well, or is it pretty much even?
It's a great question. And I'll start and I'll let Keith answer his side. Keith and I have a management meeting every Monday at 9 a.m. And that meeting is supposed to go for an hour. It typically goes for an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes, depending. And during that meeting, we have what's called a level 10 dashboard. This dashboard tracks all our goals and the things that we're responsible for. The meeting is there to share ideas, to follow up and touch base with each other to see where we are in the company, as well as give us a little bit of accountability to each other. So he'll have his list, I'll have my list, and we kind of share notes every Monday at 8 or 9. And that really, since we started doing that, we've been doing that now for a year and a half or 2 years, that really has helped with the vision that you mentioned. So when you ask how long do we spend on vision, I can guarantee that we spend an hour and a half together on vision at least. Then from that list, we'll go back and let's say it's my job to research, here's a practical one, research how to install Linux in anticipation for Claris Studio. Okay, so that would be sort of a goal that we have. And that would be sort of a task. And then it would be my team to get that. And then next Monday, we'd talk, okay, how's that project going? So from that aspect, there's that. Now I'll just say one more thing. Keith and I go to a business summit twice a year. The summit is essentially a weekend retreat where we get together with 25 other business owners and talk business and use that as a time to test our strategy and to get feedback from other business owners. During that time, it usually requires a long travel, like 2.5-hour car ride or plane ride somewhere, whatever it is. During those travel times, we huddle, and that becomes our most effective goal planning dream session ever. And we used to do it on the way to DevCon every year. And since we haven't had DevCon or Engage, we miss that. So we have to make up for that. So to answer your question, we do a weekly meeting, and then we do 2 to 3 times a year, those heavy duty goal dream sessions. And then throughout the week, probably for me, I spend maybe 10% of my time outside the things I just mentioned on vision. And then most of my time is either management or actual work, doing work, because I'm right now the guy doing most of the training, most of the YouTube videos and most of the training for the university. So, but I've chosen to spend my time that way. Keith has a little bit of a different story, but I'll let him.
Yeah, one of the other ways we have aging parents, like probably a lot of us here on this call do, and we visit them minimally once every 6 to 8 weeks, and they live in Phoenix, so that provides us a 6 or so hour car ride each way to again have these strategic discussions where we're away from the office. It's kind of important to get away from the office. The level 10 meeting that Marc is talking about that we have weekly, that's sort of where we're executing and holding each other accountable, as he said, on the strategy. It's usually the longer conversations away from the office that we spend for the annual goals that we put together. Of course, they change a little bit over the course of the year, but for the most part, they're set. The part of the meeting is to break those annual goals down into quarterly goals, and then weekly scorecard, which is, everything to work up to those annual goals. I also have those level 10 meetings with the other department managers. They each have their own scorecards, and everything rolls up sort of to the one that Marc and I review each week. For any of you who are familiar with EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, which is sort of a buzzword these days, at these summits, we were turned on to that method of organizing businesses. And even though we don't necessarily deploy all of the tenets of that particular strategy for running a business, I did tear the page out for a level 10 meeting, and I also participate in monthly meetings with these groups, with a particular group, the group that puts on this summit, talking strategy with other business owners in other industries, and it's definitely good to get outside perspective on strategy and then tactics.
I kind of latched onto the whole accountability thing you were talking about. I think one of the difficulties that a lot of CEOs face, loan CEOs, is that they're not accountable to anyone but themselves, really. And especially as far as meeting, specific goals and whatever their vision is, and milestones within that. So I think that's another big advantage. You talk about the advantage you two have, and being able to work together so closely. I think that must be a really big one.
It's a huge advantage. And what I might offer as a recommendation for those who are solopreneurs or lone CEOs is, many times, there usually is 1 or 2 key people in your organization that you can trust for certain aspects of your ownership duties. So it wouldn't be so far-fetched to potentially have a key meeting with a key person and have your own form of accountability with that person. I mean, obviously they're an employee, but you can still act as if, you're kind of reporting to them what your goals are and that sort of thing. I think it takes a special employee to get to that level, but you can find it and it can really help.
Yeah, there's a certain power with the simple technique of documenting what you're going to do and then publicly showing other people that you're going to do that, and then working towards that goal regularly. It's a great management tool as well.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. It's good advice. Thank you. You guys have a lot of different service offerings, which you've touched on. I think 4 main ones. You've got solution development, and then you've got your plugins. You've got Productive Computing University, and then you've got your hosting. So can you elaborate a little bit more on each of those and which ones you're focusing on the most at this point in time?
Sure. Well, I'll dig right in to say that our company really started with plugins. And although we were doing custom dev from the beginning, from really 1996, customs put us on the map in terms of being community aware. So we started with a change printer plugin, and then we migrated from there. And we almost started just a little bit later than Troy in his plugin. So we were one of the first. We're right up there with CNS and some of the others. And so that's what put us on the map. And that's what I think allowed us to propel ourselves to a higher level of, the platinum membership and things like that. So for years, people have only known us as like the plugin guys. But all this whole time, we've been doing custom dev along the way. It hasn't been until recently that we really started putting the hammer down on letting people know that we do custom dev as well. So for custom dev, I would say I'll start there. It's pretty traditional. We architect systems, probably a lot like what you guys do. We work with customers, find out what they need, and do our best to give it to them. And, we work on a regular basis. A lot of customers have been with us for years, I'm sure, like you guys. And a lot of times the best types of customers are the ones that are growing and that have a deep interest in becoming more efficient and just better companies. Those seem to be the best customers and the best fit for the platform, by the way. So, and then of course, like you guys, we work pretty closely with Claris. I wouldn't say that we're on a first name basis with everybody, but we do try to be the best partners we can. I guess that's the best way to say it. And when they ask us for things, we do our best to accommodate that. So I think, although we don't necessarily get really any leads from Claris or anything that would directly benefit the business from a lead standpoint, we do get, I guess, shared interest, shared passion, and hopefully some influence along the way. So our custom dev and the Claris partnership, that's the core of our business. Then we have, like I said, plugins. We have 12 or 13 different plugins that address different solutions, both on Mac and Windows. And those have been around for a long time. We also, I think we're one of the first companies to introduce a SaaS model, which is plugins that you pay for by the year. This enables us to provide free updates when it comes to anytime the operating system changes, that's a free update. Anytime FileMaker version changes, that's a free update. And anytime the third-party application that those plugins are talking to, like Microsoft or QuickBooks, those are all free updates. So we figured that's what the SaaS model works for. That's why people subscribe. So I know Keith really asked, let's do this on a regular basis. Let's charge a SaaS model. I was dead set against it. I said, no, perpetual is the way to go. People are going to really be upset, because back then it was kind of new. SaaS was the only people doing SaaS when Keith introduced it was Adobe. The rest of the world was still doing perpetual models. I mean, the rest of the software world. So that's our plugin business. That's completely SaaS now. And then hosting is something we started way back, and then we actually stopped hosting. We sold our IT part of our company and said, no more hosting. And it wasn't until, what was it? It wasn't until I had an interest in AWS that we got back into hosting again. And so that's what we do now. We host with AWS. We're in generation 2 hosting. We're creating generation 3 hosting now. Generation 1 hosting was like shared hosting on a single Mac way back in the day. Generation 2 is virtual machines running on AWS, where there's a lot more, just a better setup. And then hosting 3 is really kind of the next generation. What does it look like to host with Claris Studio on a Linux-only platform? How do we automate that to the best of our ability? So that's what we're in the middle of constructing now. So we're excited about that. And there's just a huge amount of investment that goes into this. Wim on the call will tell you just how much investment it takes to build a hosting company. And I'm sure Richard Carlton too can speak volumes about that. Then we have the education piece. So the education piece is interesting. For the longest time, I said, we'll never do training. I'm not interested in training. Training is not something we're interested in. It just, and I felt that the people had this was back when Soliant was still creating the guide, the written certification guide. So I just never had an interest in it for some reason. So then I wanted to learn more about Amazon Web Services, and I decided to become certified. And I was so blown away by the online course that I took for the AWS certification, that I said to myself, man, we need something like this for our industry, because we really didn't have, at the time, we really didn't have any kind of certification training course other than that written book. There was no real video series that specifically focused on certification. So that inspired me to create Productive Computing University, where one of the big things we do is certification training. So that's our newest baby. We started that in 2018, and I hadn't realized at the time how much I loved teaching. And now I am all in. I just love teaching. Richard Carlton's on the call. I'm sure he loves teaching too. So I'm sure he'll back me up on the thoughts I have on this. So that is where that started. And the other thing that's happening too is that we're unsure. I'm going to be honest with you. We're unsure about the future of plugins because plugins are a finite product that works under specific circumstances. It's not supported on all versions of Claris Server, for example. And so we're not sure about the future of plugins. So we said, well, we need something that'll bring us into the future and keep us relevant. So a university where we can speak about anything is the perfect way to do that.
Right.
And
The products that we've developed were always the marketing of the company. That's how we were able to draw people into the custom dev side. People knew us as plugins, but that invariably leads to who's going to do the installation and are you struggling with it, all that sort of conversation. But now with plugins, sort of old technology and APIs are the new kid on the block, although not so new anymore. The discussion points to be able to remain relevant are infinite. It's just a tremendous. It took Marc about a year to convince me that was what we needed to do and to make that shift.
right. So now the university has really grown. We have something like 26 courses that were created by one other instructor and me. Lately, I've been doing most of the instructing for the courses, and we're getting into all kinds of interesting topics. We're going to have a Claris Studio course coming up here. And we also decided recently to go into what I call traditional training, which I had avoided for the longest time because I felt it was largely covered by the other greats in our industry. Richard Carlton, Chris Ippolite, John Mark Osborne, Matt Petrowski. All these people had training courses available, but I also noticed that a lot of those people haven't done a training course in a while, with the exception of Richard. So I said, well, maybe there's room for another guy to do traditional training. So that's what we decided to do. And we just released our first segment of that. We have FileMaker Pro training for beginners. Then we'll have an intermediate and then 2 advanced versions of that coming up early next year. So we have that. And then we also have a certification test course, which allows you to go through 200 test-like questions. They're not the actual questions from the test, but they're constructed in a way that helps a student study for the test. So, like I said, this is my favorite thing to do right now. I'm enjoying the heck out of this because I feel like I've gotten to the point where I don't necessarily want to work directly with customers, but I have all this knowledge and I feel like I want to give back. I feel like I want to share it. I'm excited about the up and coming developers. And maybe we'll talk more about my philosophies in a bit if we have time, but those are the sources of revenue for productive computing. Those are our passion points. It's a nice mix of things, and we're still having a great time doing it.
We're all spending a lot of time just trying to keep up with the sort of tectonic changes that are happening with the current platform. With Claris Studio and all of the differences between FileMaker Pro and Claris Pro and so forth. I imagine that it's a bit of a scramble for you as well, just because of the speed of things and with your university offering and so forth. I think you must have to really work at it to stay ahead of everything. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. It's difficult. And Richard and I had talked several years ago when I said, "Hey, Richard, what do you think, if I get into training?" And I'll let him speak if he wants to, but he said, "Marc, don't do it for the money." That's what he said.
That's why it took me a year to convince me.
Right.
Don't do it for the money, baby. That's right.
That's right. So I said, "But Richard, you're still doing it." And I think he's doing it for the passion, for the love of the product, for the love of the people, and that's why I'm doing it too. And honestly, that's why I'm doing it. So to speak to keeping I call it keep treading water, keeping your head above water. We've got courses that were written, were created originally back when FileMaker 17 and 18 were out. So what happens now when we're working with FileMaker 19? Does that mean the course is outdated? Yes and no. So these are the things we talk about and think about a lot. The key is that, like, when it comes to FileMaker major features, they're actually kind of slow. The last few years, there hasn't been a lot of major features in the Pro product or even in the Go product. What's been changing, and where Claris has been spending all their time, is getting up to speed with making the platform a modern day, sophisticated, secure platform. I call it eating your vegetables. It's time. They've been eating their vegetables for the last 5 years, just getting secure and getting IT friendly and enterprise friendly and all these other things that are really important for the platform. But us developers, we haven't seen much of the fruits of that because it's all been behind the scenes in the background. It feels like we're now turning a corner where, okay, now they can focus on giving us features, new products, new doodads to bring this to the next level. So to answer your question, yeah, it's a constant struggle to keep up with that. Let me give you a quick example of this. I'm in the middle of this Claris Studio course, right? So I'm recording a bunch of videos, and then, okay, on November 1st, okay, now we can support timestamps and all kinds of, oh, okay, well, I guess we got to do those videos over. I'm sure Richard can totally relate to this. But yeah, that's an example of where—
It's been hard. It's been hard because they're changing so fast every 3 weeks. It's like, hey, the video you just made is out of date.
Yeah, exactly. But, I'd rather have 1,000 changes in a week than one change in a year. And I'll gladly redo videos left and right all day long if it means getting the platform to get going, absolutely. And then the other thing that we're excited about, I'm sure you guys are too, is the idea of freemium. If we can get all the up and coming developers to take this platform, grab it, and start building stuff with it, attracting new customers, new developers, I think that is going to be the saving grace for the platform, provided that the freemium handcuffs aren't too tight. Yeah, so, but that's what I'm especially excited about, and that's why we're going with so much emphasis on the training, because we want the up-and-comers to be able to come to our university, and I'm sure Richard Carlton Consulting will be right there with us to do that and to train all these new up-and-coming developers on how to do things the right way, and maybe to give them options on, this is a mature platform. There's 1,000 ways to do it. Here's a few to choose from. So
Step one, use repeating fields if at all possible.
Right. Exactly. A little inside joke there, right? Yeah. So anyway,
Still have their uses, don't they?
So yeah, we do our best to keep up. And the other thing that's tough, Bob, is the fact that it's not just Claris changing. It's, if we're working with an API course, it's the documentation and the API that you're talking to that's changing. So we've had to redo a couple of courses simply because MailChimp and DocuSign decided to change their API docs to the point where we needed a whole new course. So yeah, that it can be extremely unforgiving, time-consuming, very expensive to put on training, which means that— what's that, Keith?
I was going to say the challenge for me is with so much content that we could be doing, and then of course, as you add more courses, you have to maintain those courses. We really need to figure out how do we create more Marcs so that we can create more content, right? Because Marc is a finite resource. He's a good finite resource, but finite nonetheless. And so that's one of my challenges. And talking about the freemium and bringing new people to the platform, that's one of the reasons why we decided to get into the basic user training. How do you use this product? Because we do see a wave that could potentially hit us. And not only do we want to train other people to use the platform, but even the university serves as a means to train new hires that we have right out of school. We need to give them a training regimen to bring them up to speed as quickly as humanly possible. So it's a multifaceted endeavor.
Right.
I think one of the themes that's been running through what we're hearing about your company in general is how diversified you are. Very few FileMaker companies or FileMaker related companies, Claris related companies have that many different channels of sales and that many different services they offer. what advice would you give to companies that are looking to diversify in a similar fashion?
Great question. I'll answer it by saying you got to do the things that you love to do, because you can't do it just because it's the most profitable or because it looks good on paper. Because at the end of the day, you really want your enthusiasm and your heart in your business. You really want to build stuff or do stuff that energizes you, that you can be proud of. And so that would be my first advice. So like an example of where I see a lot of Claris partners, a lot of them don't want to deal with licensing because they're not inspired by that. For them, it's more transactional. And I was not really inspired to sell licensing either. If it wasn't for Keith, we probably wouldn't be resellers of Claris licensing. Keith has a passion for licensing because he feels that, hey, look, if we're working with these customers, why not make it easy for them to buy Claris? We can kind of broker their transaction. We can kind of protect their contract so that we have our hands on the link to the contract so they won't have to wait for Claris to get it. And all these other benefits that customers get when they buy licensing through us. So that's a perfect example of where if it was just me, I probably wouldn't do licensing. If it was just Keith, he'd do licensing probably as a primary thing. So as you look down your list of services, whether it be custom development or if you want to get into hosting or education or whatever, just make sure that you are going to enjoy that process. Even if it's you not doing it, even if you're going to have someone else do it, just make sure that you feel good about your company offering that service because it resonates with you personally as an owner. That would be my bit of advice there. And like I said, yeah. And because there's Keith and I, there's two of us. So that like, if I had 3 passions and he had 3 passions, well, now we have like 6 passions together. And that's why the company is so diverse and we do so many different things. But I'm not going to lie, it's not easy to run a multifaceted company because you do have to, your focus is fragmented a lot of the times.
Yeah,
so
it's a blessing and a curse.
It's a blessing and a curse. That's right.
Like the blessing part was during COVID, we had all of this residual income that didn't skip a beat. Nobody's, just because of COVID happens, nobody cancels their QuickBooks connection subscription. And we were really worried about the custom dev side, right? That's probably a lot of us were trying to figure out, geez, what kind of impact that's going to have. Luckily enough, it didn't have too much of an impact. But that's the blessing and a curse of having a multi-faceted income stream.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses actually saw an uptick during COVID.
Yeah.
Because people realized, oh wait, now we need a whole new way to understand and a whole different kind of visibility on our business that we can't get, remotely.
Yep.
Without some help. So,
Right.
Yeah. I want to go back to Claris and the changes that are happening because I think, like I said, there's a lot going on. We all know there is, and it's kind of it's a big deal for all of us, right? And not only are we all trying to keep up with it, but we're also trying to look down the road and kind of game out, how are things going to go with all of this, and where are we going to end up in relation to that, and also, where is Claris going to end up in relation to all the other many products that are out there on the market? Can you take a little bit of a long view? I'm sure you've thought about these things. Can you share with us how you're seeing the path ahead?
Well, this is an interesting question, and it's one that a lot of people are asking themselves. And I think if you ask 10 people this question, you'll get 10 different answers on their perception of what the future is for Claris, the platform, Claris, the company. For me, I'm actually more excited than I have been in a long time. And I think the reason I'm excited is because there seems to be a genuine rolling of the dice that they've taken by investing in a brand new, essentially a different type of platform called, the Claris Studio, the Claris Pro, the Claris Go, the Claris Server. That's a different, in a sense, it's a different platform than what we have today. So the dice rolling is, okay, we're going to essentially burn the ships at the shore in a sense. We're going to create a different file format, and we're going down this path, which is going to be cloud first. We're going to limit it to Linux only on the server. That was a bold move. There's a lot of bold moves happening with Claris right now, but to Rick Kalman said it best on the last webinar that Claris had. He said, if we had stuck with FileMaker 6 and didn't take the plunge into a file format change for FileMaker 7 and introduce all the things that FileMaker 7 had, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you because we'd be out of business. He said that, and I agree with that. And I feel like we're at sort of that crossroads now where we're really burning a lot of the ships at the shore. Yet again, they've created a soft landing for most customers. I mean, it isn't just a turning of the switch. It's a morphing into something new. Do I like all the things that are happening? Not necessarily. There's a few things that have me concerned. Having a Linux-only server has me concerned a little bit, but I also understand the advantages and benefits of that platform and what it can do for their focus. The thing that I'm most excited about, besides the innovation and the technology and the possible promise, again, I'll say it again, is the freemium model. For the last, 30 years, it's been hard to play with this platform without, a token trial that'll expire. And then to get involved, it's like $400 or $500. Okay, I got to get, it sounds like I have a minimum of 5 users I got to buy. And no developer on planet Earth, and I'll say it here, no developer on planet Earth will want to pay $500 to get started on a platform they barely can spell. They need it for free. And that's how all the best platforms have started. AWS did it this way. They give a free year for essentially, and most other platforms have some form of a very generous freemium model. So that, I think, is a great start. So I'm going to shout it to the rooftops, provided the handcuffs aren't too tight. I'll shout it from the rooftops that this is the platform for you. This is a platform you can pretty much build anything, do it quickly, and I'll show you how, and so I think the future is bright. Now, maybe some people will call that naive. But as long as I've been in this industry, I don't feel like I'm jaded to the point where I have my arms folded and I'm scowling. I don't feel that way. I have hope and promise. Are all of Claris's motives in line with mine, where my heart is? No. I mean, there's a certain amount of motives that have to be profit-driven, and they are owned by Apple. And Apple is profit-driven, and they have a certain way of doing things and a certain responsibility list. So I get that. It's not always going to be about doing things the way I think they should be done. But I am encouraged by the future. And like I said, maybe call me naive, but for the most part, I'm encouraged.
Yeah, and the competition is fierce. All of the SaaS applications out there now, it is absolutely fierce. So they've got to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are dozens of possibly viable competitors out there, with all with a different approach. That's the thing that amazes me is if you look at just the entire low code market, how many different approaches people are taking, niches that they're trying to grab, and so forth. And, and here's Claris has been just living there, doing great for years and years and years. So, hopefully there's going to be some capitalization that can take place there on that. And they can, let the world know about that.
One of the things that I think we as a community have as an advantage is that we are all great business people and solution developers. And a lot of those here today, gone tomorrow SaaS platforms, you can get in very easily and quickly, $25 a user per month for the end user, the end customer. But you run out of runway so quickly. And then who do you have that can customize it? Most of them don't even customize, right? In terms of the solutions that are out there versus the platforms that are customizable. But then you have to turn to a trusted partner, somebody that like, and trust, that can get to know your business, understand your business, and then build something and then support you for years and years and years. And we have that model. We have such an advantage to those other platforms. So even though the competition is fierce, when those platforms fail, if they can find and hear about us and understand that the community is vibrant and ready to help them and support them, then I think we're going to be okay.
Well said. We've got a few more minutes here. So I want to ask you, I think this is my favorite question out of the ones that I wanted to ask is what do you consider to be your productive computing's biggest success and why, or your own success? I'll leave the question open to you.
I don't know. I don't think we're a success yet. We're still working on it.
A work in
We're still
progress.
working on it. Yeah, work in progress.
Well, the thing I'm most proud about is kind of what we've been saying this whole time, which is the ability to work with my brother and to make a living on something that we love to do. That's most people's dream, and to be able to do it with your brother and is very special. It's something that that I have recently realized how important that is and how special that is. So that's the thing I'm most proud of when it comes to the business. As far as the technical things, it's a really good question. I'm not even sure I know the answer to that, because I'm proud of almost everything that we've done on the product side and the hosting side and the custom solutions we have. There's a lot to be happy and thankful for. But I think at the end of the day, the partnership with Keith, that's the thing that, whether we had a dry cleaning shop or a FileMaker shop, working with your brother and in the way that I do, and that's been great. That's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. What's interesting is we don't really have delusions of grandeur, although sometimes we like to we kind of get down on ourselves and think, well, we're not Microsoft, we're not Apple, we don't have that sort of level of success. We have a lifestyle business, right? Which means basically it supports what we want to do in life in a balanced way. We have time to spend with our families. We get to enjoy the journey together, building this thing. Even if I don't know if I was capable of building a business like a Microsoft or an Apple, I don't think I'd want it, because I'd rather build the business with my brother than to be wildly successful in what somebody might consider a traditional success story.
Well, productive dry cleaning doesn't have nearly as good of a ring to it.
No, it doesn't. You got Richard laughing on that one. That's good stuff.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. This has been really entertaining and informative, and so glad to have you as a guest. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it was our pleasure. Yep.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we're now going to go to breakout rooms on a pod. Welcome back, everyone. We've got a few announcements before we jump into our next presentation. The first one is about a change in our board membership. Barry Isaacson is retiring from the board as of the end of the year. His last meeting will be, I think, next month's meeting. Actually, he'll be hosting that one, and then we'll be waving goodbye to Barry as a board member. Barry's been a huge asset to this group and its board for many years. I think that we're really going to miss his insights and his hard work. And Barry, thank you for the time that you've spent with us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yes,
I think I've
Barry.
set the bar about as low as it can be set. So
He did that as a service to the next people coming on board.
Yes.
Yeah. No, thanks, Barry. Really, we've enjoyed having you.
been a pleasure.
We wanted to use this event and also our now virtual status. The way the group has kind of expanded in terms of the area that we cover, which is basically the Earth, and we wanted to take advantage of that fact in casting a wider net for new board membership. Dave Knight, I'm going to let you introduce our new board member, if you don't mind.
Yeah, first, I want to also, again, just second and kudos to Barry. He stepped in. He is certainly not the loudest of our board members. I think that would be me, but he has absolutely just been a rock behind the scenes and always delivered great shepherding and given us good insights and help. So Barry, you're a stud. Thank you for all your help. Yeah, and like Bob was saying, we kind of considered long and hard. We kind of molded a couple of candidates and thought about this, but we like the fact that, man, we're getting people from Virginia and Connecticut and the UK, and presenters from New Zealand and Qatar and all that sort of stuff. This is a bit, yes, it's FileMaker developers in Southern California, but it's not really so much anymore. So we wanted to kind of take this point and go, let's cast a wider net. We wanted to bring in a member who brings, a bit of international acclaim, debonair, I guess you could say. He gives us some regional diversity. He's got his finger pretty well plugged in to things in other parts of the country. He's got a strong passion and a commitment to the platform. And he's really shown some great engagement with the group over the last couple of years, especially. So I think our board kind of unanimously said this would be a fantastic add to our group. And we hope you guys agree and help us welcome our newest FMDiSC board member, Mr. Chris Moyer.
What an intro.
Awesome.
Chris, did you have any words of fright or acceptance or anything that you wanted to bring?
I didn't really have anything prepared. I don't know what to say. I think you said it all.
Great.
But yeah, I agree. For me, the silver lining, and for Heidi as well, the silver lining of the pandemic was that all these, what used to be hyper local user group meetings all of a sudden became virtual, and it became possible to participate with groups all over the country and all over the world. And we started to do so with gusto, and it was a great way to feel connected in the pandemic. And so I heartily second the notion that the world has expanded in COVID times, and I think it's a great thing, and we get to share the noggins of a lot more people now.
Great.
Well said. Well, welcome, Chris. We look forward to working with you. All right, moving on. Richard Carlton has some news for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, just a quick update. This is a bit of a slideshow that I'd prepared during one of our live streams. So last month we had a fairly interesting conversation with everyone about kind of where the Claris platform was going, and what bits of data we had that seemed somewhat concrete and bits of data that were a little bit more vague. So what I want to do is, one of the things we're noticing, Claris has noticed this, I've noticed this definitely, is that people just now will be going, what change, what platform? And so the user community, in-house people, maybe people that aren't normally here, one of the things we're seeing is that they are coming to this news slowly, incrementally, and there'll be people showing up next year who have not heard about this. And so one of the things, I had a meeting with, gracious enough to have a meeting with Brad Freitag about an hour this week, Ryan McCann and some other people at Claris, and to kind of follow up with that conversation. And one of the big things that came out of that conversation was that, and Todd Geis talked about this, and I reiterated on top of this, is that given an identical set of facts, Claris will be in their building. And I was talking to Brad, and I was looking at the one, I said, what you see here will be different than what the developers see, and we need to improve the communication. So the people who are talking about the platform, are actively promoting it, understand what you see, and we can articulate that, and then we understand it and maybe help you make it better. Not necessarily change your mind about stuff, because you're going to make decisions, but the idea is that we have this improved communication, because Todd Geis said this, and I thought he did such a great job. He says the things they see will be different than the things we see. Neither one's really right or wrong. It's just different. And if we were on the same page here, that's really useful. So as a reiteration of what was discussed last time and the month before that, is that there's this FileMaker platform, there's the Claris platform. And then there was this user group meeting, not a user group meeting. It was a product management meeting about a week ago. And if I slide down one slide on this, this is the link to the product management meeting. And this is one of the slides that was in it. And so when this came up, the Larochelles were talking about this a little bit ago, where Rick Kalman came up and made some statements about this. Well, basically Robert was talking his way through this, and some of the staff at Claris, and I'm not in any way picking on them, they will say something, but a lot of times we're trying to see the inflection of their voices and how it's like if I go to Rosemary and I say, "Hey, where's DEF CON?" and she goes, like that, you know that it may or may not happen, right? Well, when people say statements like this, the intensity in which they hit the statement tells you a lot about how much they believe in it and where it's going to go. And right now we're at this kind of a critical juncture, right? And it's a little scary, or a lot scary for some people. I'm concerned about it. But so I sat down with these folks and I said, they had some questions about how we saw things. And I'm like, well, part of the question is like, how long are we going to be hanging out with this FileMaker platform? And then, this Claris platform, and Knight had one estimate. We were all taking bets, like starting a pool, put $100 and you can see how long till FileMaker goes away, right? And Claris was a little distraught that we had those thoughts. Brad, they were like, "Well, that's not accurate." I said, "Well, then let's have a conversation more often." And so when we're missing bits of data, we don't have to guess at it. Because if we're guessing and having a pool, then that's not helpful. So what I'm going to emphasize out of the meeting, really nothing overly confidential or secret. I can tell you that Robert Halsey from this webinar identified these 5 items or so. Item number 1 at the management level is the number 1 item that's on their concern. And right behind that is freemium. Okay. So they are ultra locked on like missiles. And I think this is a good thing. If I come back over here, these are the list loosely of the issues, that maybe prevent people from moving over from one platform to the next platform. Claris wants to remediate these. The Linux thing, I think, is up in the air a little bit. They've made a statement on that. They're also taking people's temperature, like, "Hey, what do you really think? Can we live with this or can we not live with this?" I think they're collecting data on that, would be my guess. But they want to remediate these items and get people moved over here. And it's not like if you talk to someone where they're like, "Well, our goal is to kind of move people over here." When I talked to Brad, talked to Ryan McCann, they went, "This is our objective, number 1 thing. Remove the barriers, make it easy for people to move over, and not only remove the barriers, but create some awesome goodness on the new side that will compel people to want to have the new platform." Not this, that we remove the negatives. Great, thank you. But there's some creamy goodness, some awesome things coming, and they want to make sure that we get the benefit of that. And so I highly recommend, if you haven't watched this live stream right here, pick this one up. But I can tell you from the meeting with management that this was a major point. It's not a major point been communicated by the rest of the team at Claris, but the top 2 executives at Claris, in my limited opinion, Brad and Ryan, basically this is their goal, right? This is an essential thing. And they don't think this is a 1-year thing. This is a multi-year effort on their part, right? I don't know how far into multi-years that is. They haven't articulated that. I don't even think they really even know. So if you see a fluffy tail going by, that's the cat patrolling my desk. So I wanted to give this feedback to you because there was a little bit of lack of clarity, I think, from the last event from this user group. And I thought it was great. And I think Claris frankly listened to that. And they came back and have been really hammering this. I think all these other items here are important. And I think they're talking about the Claris, the custom connectory stuff, right? The idea that we can create our own connectors and really expand this product, the Connect product. But I think that item number 1 up here, and then maybe freemium right in there too, are the top items. And the Larochelles were talking about how big that is. They go, "Well, what do you think about this?" And I said, "Well, it's the one you know how dramatic I am. I go, "That's the one nuclear weapon you folks have." And they go, "Well," I said, "like a PR nuclear weapon. It's the one weapon you have. Unless you want to write a check to the New York Times or put ads in like terminals." And then I flew to Dallas the other day and there was an ad for Monday.com or whatever it was. It says, "You guys should be up there, but if you don't want to do that, your one PR bomb that you have to blow your message out to everyone is freemium." And I think we all agree on that. It just can't be sufficiently limited, right? So that's what I have. I want to give everyone feedback so you knew kind of there was some clarity coming from Claris. And I think it's really great that they had that. And I encourage them to continue to talk to us and fill in these bits where we don't know. Right? That way we can Because the people here in this meeting are the people out there in the community who are talking about the platform and proselytizing the platform and telling everyone how great the Claris FileMaker platform can be. We need to really know this. So that's it.
Great. Thanks,
you.
Rich.
Sure. And if I can quit sharing, that'll be awesome. There we go.
All right. Okay. Next up, we have Rosemary has an announcement.
Yes, well, first I want to reiterate what Richard just said. And I have just a note from Claris as to the contents of the last meeting. I've watched it. Andy said he's watched the second half twice. And I just want to reiterate a commitment. Claris is listening. We heard your concerns loud and clear, and we thank you for being so candid and for sharing with us. And we commit to continuing to listen and participate and go forward. So that's number one. Number two, on the freemium note, I don't know if you all saw our new ad in the Claris community, but we have slipped out that, well, freemium isn't available now. It will be soon. And we're asking people to, if you're willing to give us your email address one more time, we will email everybody who signs up for the early access when it's available in the near future. And, my ask to all of you is, if you haven't signed up already, please do, but also please help us get that word out to your colleagues in your companies and your customers and your networks and peers, because the more people we have exploring the platform early on, the better it will be for the community. So I actually have a link you all can use to share that I'm dropping in chat.
Thanks, Rosemary. All good to hear. And we appreciate the engagement that we're having with Claris these days too. It's been great. There's been some good dialogues going on. So thank you very much. Barry, you had a quick one, right?
Yeah, the December meeting is going to be my last meeting. I'd like to make it a good one. So if anybody knows of any content that they'd like to show, or have heard of any content they'd like to see at the meeting, please contact me. I'll drop my contact info in the chat.
Great, thanks, Barry. All right, and I just want to throw out a quick reminder. If you've never presented before and you're feeling a little bit freaked out about the idea of doing that, don't worry, we'll help you. We'll make it easier. So it's a good opportunity to take that leap if you've ever considered it. It's very rewarding doing presentations in front of a group. You learn a lot every time you do it, and it raises your profile. It's really fun to do. All right. Next up, we have Mr. Wim Decorte of Soliant. And he's going to be talking to us a little bit about Claris security. Wim?
All right. Right. Can you make me presenter so I can share my screen?
Yes, I can. One moment, please.
All right. In the meantime, for those who don't know who I am, I'm Wim Decorte. I run the Claris/FileMaker department at Soliant, which at last count was about 42 people. Before we get going, I want to wish a happy Veterans Day, or Remembrance Day, as it's known in other parts of the world, to all the veterans out there. And we have a few on this call. So thank you for your willingness to go out in harm's way and safeguard our liberty. It's not a trivial thing. So thank you.
You should be good to go, Wim.
All right, thanks. So along the lines of what we talked about, a little bit what Keith and Marc were talking about, and also what Richard was saying about the education around the Claris platform, what it is, what it isn't. I will focus on security a little bit today, but it bears repeating what it is, right? It's fairly new to many of us, and certainly out there in the community. And Richard just made a point. And we see that on the community forum. People are totally surprised that there's something like that out there, and people don't always understand what it is and what it is. And so what we have on the screen is what we have today, or what we've always known in the past, right? That's the FileMaker platform with its sibling, where your FileMaker server is in the cloud, and you have that Claris ID authentication that is part of that as well. And then I guess one of the reasons why Claris changed their name way back when is when they added that secondary product, Claris Connect. It's a little orphaned since its launch about 3 years ago. So it sits there by the side. You can integrate it with the FileMaker platform, but by and large, it's like its own thing that is not very well integrated. So that is what we know. That is what is the FileMaker platform. And then there's the Claris platform, the thing that was launched, 2 months ago. And its core components, to some extent, are the siblings of what we know on the FileMaker side, right? There's a Claris server, there's Claris Pro, there's Claris Go, and these are functionally, for all intents and purposes, they are not, but we can regard them as being functionally equivalent to FileMaker Pro, FileMaker Go, and FileMaker Server. What the Claris platform has, in addition to that, is the other two components that are now explicitly named to be part of the platform, right? So Claris Connect and the new kid on the block, Claris Studio. So that is the Claris platform. We have the FileMaker platform, we have the Claris platform. So we got these two different things. And it's no surprise that the way that you think about security is going to be different between those two. But before I get there, I want to make the point about the licensing for that, right? So from a licensing point of view, it's actually a whole lot easier than having these two distinct silos to think about. Because if you buy into the Claris platform licensing, you get all of the Claris platform, obviously, but you also get all of the FileMaker platform, right? So, and the pricing is actually not too bad when we look at it. So there's really not a big hurdle to get into the Claris platform, because you get the FileMaker platform, right? So you're not really giving up, or you're not having to make a hard choice between the two platforms. Like we think of them a little bit as silos in our minds. They're really not. If you license the Claris platform, you get the FileMaker platform. So you're really not boxed in, and you can continue to do what you do now and be ready for the other things that as features build out. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can have hybrid solutions between now and when we finally switch over completely to the Claris platform down the road. And I think when I give this presentation internally or for clients, I have my next slide is, does that mean that the FileMaker platform is deprecated? And it really isn't, right? And I think Rick made a point in the last webinar really well, is we know that the FileMaker platform is going to go away, right? Like, we shouldn't kid ourselves. It is going to go away, but it is going to go away. It is going to go away. Ideally, obviously, there's a little bit of unknown there. When we say that we don't want to use it anymore, when we start using the Claris platform because it has all the features that we want, that's the time that the FileMaker platform becomes obsolete, right? So that's sort of the vision.
You look really good.
There's somebody who's not muted there, and then we're getting some background noises. All right, thanks. So from a functional point of view, we have the two, right? So we have the Claris platform and we have the FileMaker platform. So we're going to focus on the Claris platform for the next little bit, and we'll talk about security. And security, we'll break it down into the big two components that we always see, right? There's going to be the authentication and the authorization. The authentication is all about who are you, and are you even allowed to enter the use my solution. And then once you get through that gate, it's all about what is it that you can do based on the privileges that have been assigned to you, right? So authentication, that's the easiest one. The Claris platform is all about Claris ID. At this point, there's no other identity provider that you can use with the Claris platform but Claris ID. And in the slide that Richard showed us there a couple of minutes ago, it's one of the top priorities for Claris to expand that, right? To give us other forms of authentication into the solutions that we build with the Claris platform. But for now, it is only a Claris ID. With a small variant of that, which is the Claris ID extended account. If you haven't seen that, I can show you when actually I go into Studio. But you can assign, think of it as an app password. If you ever did any integration with Microsoft's or even Google's APIs, and especially now with that whole thing that's going on with SMTP, where you can have your account and then create an app password, which is basically a different password for your same account. So the extended account when it comes to Claris ID is the same thing. And you actually use that for logging into WebDirect at this point, and for logging into the data API on your Claris server, right? So you cannot log into either one of those with your actual Claris ID. You have to log in with the equivalent app password that is tied to your Claris ID. Some of that will go away as they streamline the identity and the authentication into the various components of the Claris platform. But for now, that's what it is there. There's an obvious side effect of Claris ID and using the Claris or the Claris ID as your identity provider. It is a browser-based login. And this is something that we've talked about in the past in previous sessions. It means that you cannot use your solution if you don't have access to the internet, right? Because the gate by which you get into your solution is logging in at Claris with your Claris ID, and that is in the browser. That's online. If you cannot go online, you cannot use your solution. There's a little bit of a gray area there, because when you do log in with the browser, you get assigned in the background. That happens. You get a session token. That session token has a particular length, so it has an expiry time. So there is the possibility of you working in your solution more so with your Claris Pro, Claris Server solution, not so much with Studio. If your internet is down, you cannot get into Studio, but you still can get into your Claris Pro, Claris Server solution as long as you have a valid token, right? If your session length or your session hasn't expired, even though you may be disconnected from the internet, there is a possibility that you can work on that. Don't build solutions with that in mind, because it's going to be somewhat unpredictable, because it has an expiry, but it also is somewhat sensitive to network changes. If I do something on my phone here on Wi-Fi, but I move out of my Wi-Fi range and I'm now on 5G or LTE, it may detect that you're on a different network, and that may invalidate your session right there and then, and will require you to re-authenticate. So keep that in mind, not just for offline access, but also for the user experience that your users may have if they navigate between different networks and network types. So that's something to keep in mind. One other consequence of the Claris ID when it comes to current, the only choice as the identity provider right now, there is no concept of group-based authentication. That too is coming, but right now we don't have it. And that means that if you picture how you create accounts in your Claris file, it looks exactly the same as your FileMaker file, except that when you create an account, it has to match the Claris ID, which is typically an email address, right? So you have to create all of those individually in your Claris file, because there is no concept of groups for now. And feel free to interrupt me with any and all questions. Actually, let me open up the chat to see if I can catch any questions that are coming up there. I did not want to do that. Go back there. No. Go back there. All right. So that's authentication. Authentication happens through the Claris ID identity provider. Authorization, that is where most of the differences are otherwise. That's really where it gets interesting. And if we focus on the FileMaker equivalent of the Claris platform, so Claris Server, Claris Pro, Claris Go, the rights that you get assigned inside the solution once you are authenticated, that's really no difference than what we have now in FileMaker, right? It's still the same privilege set that you assign or attach to an account, and it's the privilege set that determines what you can and cannot do. There are some caveats with that, and I'll show you one of those in a minute. So for all intents and purposes, it is the privilege set inside the solution that is going to determine what the user can do, and that's you'll be familiar with that because that's what you've been doing for a long time as well now. When you create a new file in the Claris platform, that file automatically gets an account. You don't have to set anything like that up. It gets a full access account that is tied to your Claris ID. All right. Remember, you cannot use Claris Pro unless you're logged in with your Claris ID. So your Claris Pro application knows who you are. So when you create a new file, it automatically adds a full access account with your Claris ID as sort of like the only active account. So there's really only two accounts when you create a new Claris file. That is the one that has your Claris ID and full access. And then there's something called a default user. That account is disabled by default, but it's there. We didn't have that notion of a default user on the FileMaker side. The closest sibling is the guest account on the FileMaker side, but the default user in a Claris file, if you enable it, that means that anybody with a Claris ID can open the file, and they will assign the privilege set that you attach to the default user account inside the file, right? So it sort of saves you from having to know ahead of time all of the Claris IDs, the email addresses of the users for your file, provided that all of those users that you don't name explicitly should have the same privileges, basically the same privilege set inside your Claris file. Then you can use that notion of the default user to spare yourself, save yourself from having to add all of those individual Claris ID accounts in your file. On the Soliant website, there's a blog post that I wrote a couple of weeks ago that talks specifically about that. So if none of that sounds familiar, or you don't quite get what I'm driving at with that one, you can go and read what's there. Remember that default account in a new Claris file is disabled by default, but it's there. Tony had a question there. Are the privilege sets still attached to files so that you can have a role with high privilege set in some files and low privilege in another file? Absolutely, right? So the authentication is different because you have to go through the gates of the Claris ID identity provider, but the privilege sets by and large are exactly the same as we have in a FileMaker file, right? So if you have a solution that consists of multiple Claris files, you can do exactly the same as what we do on the FileMaker side with the same account having a set of privileges and rights in one file that is different than the set of rights and privileges in another file. Absolutely. All right. And I'll come back to that. We'll actually show you the Claris Pro in action there in a little bit. So those are the equivalents of what we know on the FileMaker side, right? So and actually, before I jump into Studio, I do want to mention Claris Connect. And Claris Connect really hasn't changed now that it's officially part of the Claris platform. Claris Connect is, when it comes to authentication and authorization, is a little bit of an odd duck, right? Because Claris Connect is a background flow. Although there is some possibility for building flows that have user interactivity, it's really all about making data flow between two systems and make that data flow in the background. So when you do connect systems, you will be using accounts. And if you use a Claris server or a FileMaker server as something that either has to provide data or that will receive data, you're going to go through the data API. So it's going to be whatever account you use for that and whatever privilege sets that you attach inside your Claris file or your FileMaker file that will do that. So that notion of authentication doesn't really come into play a whole lot with Claris Connect. There is some streamlining that is going to happen, and I'll show you that in a minute as well, between the interface for who gets access to your Claris Connect space and who gets access to your Claris Studio space. All right, so Claris Studio. There's really two things there that we need to think about when we talk about Claris Studio, which is the new addition to the Claris platform. It's about executing functionality, like who gets the rights to do what. But there's a secondary aspect to that that is a little less clear, and that is who gets access to the data in the background, who gets access to the backups. Are there any backups? So there are security questions, let's put it that way, about what happens in the background and who gets access to that, right? In FileMaker terms, think of it as the distinction that you make between giving people access to the solution, so basically making them log into your solution, and who gets access to your FileMaker server. Who gets to do DevOps things on your FileMaker server? Who knows where your backups are? Who gets access to your backups, right? So those are relevant security questions as well that go over and beyond just providing access into, by authentication, into your solution and then giving them rights inside your solution. So there's those things to consider there about. And actually, while I'm there, I want to sort of reinforce some of the things that Marc and Keith are doing with their university and providing, trying to catch up on what's available and providing that as education, same as what Richard is doing with his videos. We talked about in that slide that Richard showed us about the roadmap that Claris has laid out there for us a little bit. And my pet peeve on that is that it's fine. There is some friction about features that we're missing, clearly, right? And these are, I think, largely well known, especially the ones that we want in the short term, like other authentication providers, since we're talking about security. I think there's another need there too that is not being fulfilled, and it's causing some friction. That is documentation, right? Some of the things that we're going to talk about when you dive into that stuff we're all making assumptions about what is there, what is not there, how it should be working, and we shouldn't be making these kinds of assumptions, right? The documentation should keep up with the pace of these releases, and as Richard has said, the release cycle is tight, right? It's a lot of these things get released in very short order, and it's moving fast, right? So there's this help center that we can get to. I personally don't think it's good enough. I think we can remove a lot of friction in the community for newcomers, for existing FileMaker developers, by making sure that people can find the documentation and don't have to guess at it. But that's where, for now, this is where you can go and read up on a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about. So certainly do that. So when you log into Studio, this is what it looks like if you've never done that. Once we get the freemium, you'll be able to do that if you haven't. You log into Studio, it's in the browser, so it's web-based, and you provide credentials, right? So that gets you into the gate. Once you're into the gate with Studio, there's three categories, if you will, of users. There's managers, there's team members, and then there's whoever is going to consume what you make with Studio, right? The first couple of releases with Studio were all about anonymous data collection, right? That really meant that on the consumer side, the people that use what you build, you don't know who they are. It's anonymous, right? So anybody with a link to whatever you build in Studio can enter data, right? So the consumers were anonymous. That has actually changed in the last couple of releases there. But when you look at the Studio interface for users, right? So you see that on the left-hand side there. What Studio called users isn't really, well, they're users. That's what they chose to call it. But that's really about who gets to build to some extent and who gets to use as a named user versus the anonymous users, right? So, and if that's a little confusing, feel free to ask any questions about that, because we have to get this right in our minds, right? And we have to be able to communicate that to our clients and to people who are asking questions about that, about what it really means to be a Studio user. Who are you? What is that you can do, and do that, right? So a team manager can do different things in Studio than a team member. And as you can see here in that interface, where it says role, there's only two roles there. The anonymous user or the consumer for the anonymous part is not mentioned there because you don't name those users, right? You have to name your team members by making them a team manager or a team member, but those are going to be the named ones. keep in mind, just like with actually, I have a studio with that. There's some analogy there with Claris Connect. When I talked about licensing in the beginning, when you set out to say buy the minimum Claris Platform license, which is a 5-user license, right? Those 5 users are really meant for the Claris Pro Server Go side of things. You can have more than 5 people named as team managers, team members on the studio side, just like you can have more than 5 people named on the Claris Connect side, right? So the number of users that you'll license doesn't speak, at least for now, to the number of users that you name as people that can participate in studio side of your subscription or the Connect side of your subscription, right? Is that going to remain like that? Don't know, right? So, and I'm hoping that that'll be put on the roadmap and can provide us some clarity in a hurry, because these are some of the crucial decisions that we need to make and be able to talk through with our customers so that they don't feel trapped if they make a decision based on what's now and then things change in the future, right? So, but there's some analogy. If you have used Connect a little bit in the past, then the way that you build your team in Studio is very similar to that. All right. This is going to be the last slide, and then I'll dive into actually showing you some of the stuff in Claris Pro and in Claris Studio, so that you can get familiar with that. This is the slide that speaks about hybrid strategies, right? Because none of us at this point is ready to take your FileMaker solution and convert it in a Claris solution and deploy it as is. I think the number of use cases that you can find for that is at this point very limited. Doesn't mean that that you cannot use good features that exist now in the combination of Connect and Studio. But your FileMaker solution is probably going to remain your FileMaker solution for a little bit. So what does that mean, and how can you put these things together? We know, and actually I'll show you that in a minute, we know that only Claris Pro can communicate with Claris Studio and use the data tables that exist on Studio, right? That's the only way that you can get to your Studio tables. Obviously, you can build forms and all of the things you can build in Studio, obviously will use the Studio tables, but if you want to use them in your solution, Claris Pro is the only way that you can do that. Claris Server has the data API, has the OData API. FileMaker Server has the OData API and the data API. So clearly we can exchange data that way by making the servers communicate, right? So if you have a good use case to use Studio, but you want to use that data on the FileMaker side, then that's an obvious way. You would have to deploy Claris Pro and Claris Server so that they can retrieve and interact with the data in your Studio tables, and then you exchange the data to and from your FileMaker solution by way of the data API. So that's one way of doing that. And I mean, besides the obvious, just imports and exports, right? But if you want to do it in as a system-to-system kind of way, then that's how it goes. Now, note that that's not a freebie, right? So this will eat out of your data and OData API allotments, and that allotment, just as a reminder, gets kicked in every time you read data from, right? So for pushing data into something, that allotment is not used, but as soon as you retrieve data from something, so if you retrieve data from Claris Server, the allotment meter kicks in, right? So if you retrieve something from the FileMaker to put into the Claris Server, that allotment gets metered as well. So keep that in mind, but that's one way you can do it. And then there's, of course, the way that you can use Connect, right? I will see, I'm pretty sure that we will see more use of Connect now that we have a better idea of where it could fit in. And to make data flow between a Claris solution and a FileMaker solution, Connect is ideal for that, right? Connect can help us in that very easily. So those are some of the ways that I see data flowing in a hybrid solution until we have enough features on the Claris platform side that we wouldn't consider building them or any solution using FileMaker anymore. Let me quickly check any questions I have. Alan had a question. What about multi-file solutions and getting and setting up multiple privileges set for users to have different action levels? I think if I understand you correct, Alan, that's the same question that Tony had, right? So and don't get me started on that. For me, it doesn't make sense that a FileMaker file or a Claris file is a little bit of an identity store in itself, right? I wish that there was something that is a security level at the solution level, that it doesn't really matter how many files we have in a solution. But for now, we have to work what's there. And if you have multiple files, every user can have a different privilege set. So basically a different set of rights in every file. It doesn't have to be the same set of rights in every file across a solution. So that really hasn't changed with the way that Claris Platform does versus the way that the FileMaker platform does. That just remains as is. All right. Let me get this out of the way. Yes, I need to get to that at some point. I have Claris Pro open, right? So Claris Pro looks exactly the same as as FileMaker Pro. This is actually the older version. There's a new version that got released 2 days ago. I have that open there as well, because I was doing some testing earlier today about something that I want to show you, where I think there's some work to be done. And it's the area where I would want to have better documentation provided by Claris on how some of these things work. All right. You can belong to multiple Claris Studio teams, right? Just like you can belong to multiple Claris Connect teams. But when you belong to multiple teams, you log into your FileMaker solution. Actually, let's do that so that we can actually see that very quickly. So when you open Claris Pro for the first time and you haven't signed on to any Studio team yet, this is what you'll get, right? You'll be asked to log in, and you can do that. I'll use this one. Oh yes, of course. No, that's fine. That should be the right one. There we go. So I'm logged in now, and it shows that I belong to 2 teams, right? So there's the Claris Partner Sandbox that not most, but many Claris partners are part of. And then Soliant has its own subscription to the Claris platform, so I'm there. At any time, you can switch using a different Claris ID. And again, Claris ID is nothing more than an email address that is recognized as being a Claris ID, just like you have an email address that is an Apple ID, right? It's the same concept. So when I open a file, I will not be prompted for credentials because my Claris Pro already knows who I am, right? So there's a little bit of single sign-on going on right there. And the way that I know who I'm logged in at is I can use the get functions that we have, same ones that we have in FileMaker Pro, right? So my account name is my Claris ID. I have full access, and my account type is a Claris ID. If we have a quick look at the managed security, it doesn't look that different than what you're used to on the FileMaker side, right? When you create a new account, it is a Claris ID account. It's the only account type that you currently can use, and you put in the Claris ID for the username, and you assign it a privilege set. So when you get to the point of assigning a privilege set, you're in FileMaker territory, right? It's the exact same thing as what we do now on the FileMaker side. I created this file with this account when I was logged into Claris Pro with this Claris ID, which is why it's the first account. And then I added this one later. This is that notion of the default account that I mentioned, the default user. So if I toggle this on, I can give you this file. And as long as you have a Claris ID and you log into Claris Pro with your Claris ID, you will be able to open this file with this read-only privilege set. Right, so the read-only privilege set is same as on FileMaker with the guest account, is the default a privilege set. I can of course change that to any privilege set that I want, but and I've seen this fly by in the comments. This is how you can share a file without having to know who you're sharing it with, in essence, right? So if you just want to share a file and you don't care who opens it, as long as I have a Claris ID, that's how you do it, by toggling on the default user account. And remember, it's off by default. All right. Once we get into the privilege sets, nothing is different than in FileMaker, except one thing to consider is of these three tables that you see here, only the first one is an actual internal, for lack of a better term, FileMaker table, right? It's a Claris table. The other two are studio tables, and I'll show you how we got to those in a sec. But all the rest is the same. It's the same rules. It's the same tools for building the rights, the authorization inside your Claris solution. All right. This is probably going to be expired by now. It is. I will log into Studio with that same Claris ID as I logged into them on the FileMaker side, because I want to show one thing that is important, because that connecting data email address, that Claris ID that I used, is not a team manager. It's a team member, right? So the user experience when you're a team member and you log into Studio is what we see here, right? I have no building capabilities, right? Only the team managers build things to some extent. There are some gray areas where, as a team member on a pre-built hub, and I'll show you the team member and sharing of the hubs and all of that. And by the way, Beverly has a great series of blog posts that go into a lot of detail on these features and what hubs mean and views and all of that stuff. So I highly recommend that you read up on those if you haven't looked at those. But so a hub, as a team member, I get invited to a hub, and a hub is a collection of views. So as a team member, I only get to see the views that a team manager have assigned to me. And in this case, the reason I want to point this out is this is a spreadsheet view. Over here on the left-hand side, this Wim01 is actually the name of the table, right? So underlying this spreadsheet view on Studio is a table on Studio called Wim01. And as you can see, I have access to the data. I can add columns. So although I said I cannot really build views, so I cannot build my own spreadsheet, I cannot create my own table and do my own thing as a team member. As a team manager, I could, but as a team member, I can't. But on this spreadsheet, on this table that the team manager has assigned to me, I can add columns. I can add fields to that. I can add data. I can do stuff. So it's not like I cannot build anything at all, but my building privileges are somewhat limited. All right. So kind of difficult to convey exactly where that limitation is when you talk to clients about what it means to be a team manager and a team member. There's probably at this point a little bit of a lack of granularity between those two roles, because when it comes to being able to log in, you only have those two. Either you're a team manager and you can do pretty much anything, or you're a team member and you can only do the things that a team manager assigned to you, but you can still do certain things like adding fields, which may not be something that you want a team member to do. But there it is, right? So there is not a lot of granularity on the Studio side at this point. All right. So if I go back to the views that I have, actually, can I go back? Yes. All right. So this list detail and this dashboard are basically different views built on that same spreadsheet. If we have time, and if you haven't really played with Studio at all, as a team manager, when you build something, you typically would start with building a spreadsheet because it's the closest to building a table that as you get with Studio. And then based off that spreadsheet, you can build different views like a form or a dashboard or a Kanban board that use that spreadsheet. And I use spreadsheet as sort of like the proxy for the table. All right. So you can't really see it from here because as a team member, I don't have insight as to what underlying table this uses. But take my word from it. This list detail view and this dashboard view are built off of this spreadsheet. And that means that all three of these views, and the view is a way of interacting with the data, share the same underlying table on the studio side, that Wim01. All right. Where am I going with that? If I'm going back into my Claris Pro, and remember, I'm still logged in to that one as a team member. I'm not a team manager. And you've seen this before in the demos, but the way that you get access to your Claris Studio tables is you go to your graph, you add a table occurrence, and you pick a Claris Studio data source, just like we do with ESS at this point, right? So here's the surprising thing, right? And that's something to consider when it comes to security, is that Wim01 is the only table that is being used in that only view that me as a team member has access to. But I can see all of the data tables in that subscription, right? That's probably not what you want to see happen. So I can go pick, I probably have a couple, I don't know which ones have data in there. That's actually interesting. That should not have happened there. There we go. All right, if I now build a, which one? I picked this one, right? So although this is a table that the team manager on the studio side has decided not to give me access to, from the Claris Pro side, I have access. I can see what fields there are in there. I can create layouts based on that one. And I can see the data and manipulate the data, right? So that's what I meant by the lack of granularity currently when it comes to protecting some of that studio data that you have when you think of constraining that from the studio side, right? As a team manager on the studio side, you get to control what people can do when they log into Studio. You don't really get the same set of controls when that user also has access to Claris Pro and can create their own files and start adding data in there, right? So so keep that in mind as something that that we have. All right, I'll log out of this one. Oh, by the way, I mentioned this. When you log into Studio, over here on the lower left-hand side, you have this extended account. This is where you set that app password style password. And that's the one that if I wanted this account, this wim@connectingdata.com email address, Claris ID, to have access to WebDirect or to be able to use it for the data API, I have to come in here and set a password, right? So that's where you will find that.
We're going to Chick-fil-A. You want anything? Thanks.
Did you have a question there, Howard?
Oh, sorry, no.
Okay. All right, I'll sign out and sign in with this one. So this is me signed in to the same Soliant Consulting studio account, but now this time I am a team manager, right? So as a team manager, that's me right there. I'm a manager. The other one that we were just using is a team member. So this connectingdata.com. So as you can see, the interface looks different. So let's quickly jump to Hub so we can tie in that the interface that we looked at when I was logged in with that team member account. So I only have one hub, and it's, you recognize this, it was called Wim Sandbox. And this is where I can invite members, right? So this is where, as a team manager, I get to decide who will be able to see this hub, and by extension, the views inside that hub when they log into Studio, right? So this is where I can do that. Now note that the team managers are grayed out, because all team managers by default will have access to all hubs and all views. So again, there's no granularity there either. If you, because you only have one studio subscription, if you have different teams or different departments or whatever functional distinction that you want to make, you cannot create subsections in that where you say, I'll make you a team member, but for only these views and these hubs. If you're a team manager, you get to see everything, right? So that's something to keep in mind there as well. If you have different departments and you want to keep a bit of segregation between departments or groups of users, even at the team manager level, that's not something that you can do right now. So all team manager by default get access, and you get to pick who from the team members get access to your hubs, and like I said, by extension to the views inside the hub. All right, spreadsheets. When you have a spreadsheet, and this is no different than the other one. So this is the spreadsheet based on the 01. There's a couple of things I can do from here, right? I can create a dashboard from there that will then basically use this spreadsheet and by extension that underlying table to work from there. And then from here too, I can create from that form, list, and detail and Kanban. And that's typically when I do something in Studio, I do start with that spreadsheet. And then from there, I add different kinds of views, different expressions of that data, either in forms or list details or anything like that from there. All right. The customer console is kind of interesting because it's not really tied into anything at this point, but that's where we will see some synergies happen down the road. If I log in with this one. So this is the Claris customer console. If you're familiar with FileMaker Cloud, or if you have used Claris Connect, you'll know what this is, right? So this is the what is called the Claris customer console, where you have access to your different subscriptions. So this is the Claris Platform subscription that we have as Soliant. We have a FileMaker Cloud as well, and we have different connects, and these are some of the client ones that I have access to. Note that Studio is not listed in there, right? So at this point, there is no link between the Claris customer console and the way that you manage your team. Because if I go into my Claris Connect, I'm actually in the Claris Connect, and I have my team members here. This is sort of like what I had on that slide. These are the people that can build or help build and maintain my Connect flows, right? So this is what this team means. Because Connect really doesn't have users in the sense that Studio has users. I mean, consumers more than users, right? A Claris Connect flow gets consumed in a sort of anonymous way. There's certainly points, stops along the way in a Connect flow where authentication is needed to exchange data between different systems. But the team members here on the Connect side, these are not people that use the flows. These are the people that build the flows, right? So, and it looks somewhat similar to what we saw here in the users on the Studio side, but there's no link between the two. These will get merged at some point so that you have one place to manage your team. Don't quite know what that looks like yet, but that is going to come. So it'll be somewhat easier to maintain your teams there. So keeping that in mind. Being mindful of time, I think I can stop it right there. I do want to belabor the point a little bit about the team members, team managers, and consumers when it comes to Studio. One of the changes that was made probably in the last or next to last iteration of Studio is the first couple of versions of Studio, and I can best demonstrate that from here, because we have these different types of, let's go back in here, right? So I have spreadsheet, I have form, I have list detail, and I have Kanban. And then dashboard. It's kind of weird that dashboard is not listed here. You can only create a dashboard when you first go to the spreadsheet view and then create a dashboard from there, because this is a dashboard. But yeah, these are the different types of views. One of the critical changes that was made to Studio is that you can now no longer share list details, Kanbans, and dashboards to anonymous users. You can only share form views to anonymous users, right? And that's a big change from the original release of Studio. And it's one of those changes that has sort of like skipped by people, right? Because when we saw the webinars first and when we played with the first release, every view that you build with Studio could be shared anonymously with anybody in the world. That's no longer the case, right? So only team members can now see list details, Kanbans, and dashboards. Anonymous sharing is still possible with forms, but that is the only view type of Studio that you can share anonymously. So that's a really critical change that was made to Studio when it comes to security and who gets access to what. And Beverly makes the point, we need to share the dashboard like in WebViewer. That's actually a good point, and I'm still playing with that. So the reason I didn't want to get into that a little too much here is actually, if I go in here and creates a blank page here, there's an interesting thing that goes on when you have when you're inside Claris Pro and you're, of course, Claris Pro knows who you are. If you create a web viewer in here, and you make a link to Studio, basically the same URL that you use to log in, so platform.claris.com. If you put that into your web viewer inside Claris Pro, the web viewer knows who you are, right? So it inherits your authentication from your Claris Pro. So that's one way that you can use the views that whoever is logged into Claris Pro, if they are a team member, so they can see the list details and the dashboards and whatnot, they can automatically see that in the web viewer in Claris Pro. We had originally thought that a important piece of the strategy for hybrids to bridge the gap between the Claris platform and the FileMaker platform would be to consume some of the Claris Studio things in a web viewer in a FileMaker solution, right? So that's no longer the case. You can still do it, but if you are in a FileMaker solution, not a Claris solution, but in a FileMaker solution, you add a web viewer and you point it to the Studio, the user will have to log in, right? So the user will have to authenticate inside a web viewer to get access to Studio, since you can no longer anonymously share things like dashboards and Kanban boards and list details. So keep that in mind. But it was kind of interesting to see how the web viewer in a Claris solution inherits the authentication from the Claris Pro app itself. So that was kind of interesting. How would your thought there that I thought I heard this was just a temporary step back, or you talked specifically about the web viewer in Claris solution?
No, specifically about locking it down to just forms for anonymous users. That the other views, list and dashboard, would ultimately be available, but I mean, this is just rumor and speculation at this point.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the things where the last webinar that Claris did, where they put out that roadmap that Richard has shared. I think I really liked the way that they've done that, because it's sorely needed that we know where they're going. I wish it had a little more detail about things like that, right? Because there's nothing worse than people looking at Studio now and saying it doesn't do what I want to do, and I'm basically abandoning it. My fear with that is that is what happened to some extent with Connect, right? It's very hard to get people back enthusiastic about Connect, because they, in their mindset, they're going like, I looked at it, it doesn't do anything for me, right? So they basically said, well, that's it. With Studio, I would wish that we can provide them with enough solid documentation, solid roadmaps. And with roadmap, I don't mean that I need to know what feature is going to come next, right? But things like that, like if we shouldn't all have to expend the same amount of discovery, these things should be just laid out there. If there's a temporary fix, I can live with knowing that it's a temporary fix. I cannot, it's more difficult for me to engage with a client, or for a client to come to me to say, hey, we can build that. And I'm going like, yeah, I'm not sure that it'll stay like that, right? That's the difficult part in getting us over that first hurdle and getting us to this first months, maybe a year, 2 years, I don't know, of people understanding what the Claris platform and the interaction between the different components of the Claris platform do. I'll reiterate that that's why we need the documentation to keep pace with the release of this, right? So that we don't have to guess at that. But that's what I had for all of you today. So thanks for listening.
Wim, could you speak for just a minute? You mentioned that the Claris ID is the only account type now. And so the sort of huge implication of that is that there's no such thing as group accounts anymore in Claris Pro. And that's problematic for a lot of, the SBA type people who have like a vertical market solution and maybe the organization wants to do centralized identity management. There's no identity federation right now. I've heard a rumor that OAuth is in the works for the SBA people to be able to, have some flexibility there. But have you heard anything more about that, or?
Yep. Yep. The roadmap that Claris did, 2-3 weeks ago, and that was the slide that Richard showed, is that they. It's very high on their list of priorities of allowing us to use different identity providers. And there was a poll that they've done on the community, I don't know what section of the community, where they were asking questions that led us to believe that they were taking the temperature about which ones, right? Because clearly they have a set of priorities around that. For me, that's sort of where I would wish the clarity would come from, right? If they say, we think we, in the next couple of and I don't, again, I'm not asking them to say you'll have it next month and it'll look like that, but if they are setting priorities to say we are going to do Azure AD as the first one, right, and then we're thinking about these 2 or 3 as the next ones to consider, that provides some measure of clarity or direction that we can then talk to our clients to say, if you're not doing Azure AD, we know something is coming, or maybe that's an opportunity to get into Azure AD or something like that. But from my understanding, from what I read into the roadmap, different identity providers through OAuth is very high on their to-do list.
All right, great. Any final questions for Wim before we wrap this part up? Wim, that was extremely informative. It was great to see such a deep dive on some of that stuff, because I think a lot of us were really lacking in understanding on some of those areas. So super helpful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right. You all might remember that Dave Knights put out a great questionnaire survey regarding the current changes in the Claris platform. And a lot of data has been gathered up to this point based on that. I think it's been pretty successful as far as the amount of information that Dave now has to share with us. He's going to give us kind of a brief look at it. I think there's going to be a lot more coming in a future meeting, but this is going to be kind of a high level peek at what has been put out there so far. Dave?
Thanks, Bob. One of the worst things that you can ever do in the FileMaker universe is follow Wim Decorte on a session. So great job, Wim. I hope we can get an asterisk on that, because it feels like we're going to have some addendums to this in the future. So I look forward to that. Let me kind of get rolling here. Let's see if we are rolling. We are rolling. Hi, guys. Everybody knows Dave Knight, Angel City Data, longtime member of the board and member of the group, and so on and so forth. As Bob said, about a month-ish ago, we released a survey that is predominantly trying to ask some deep questions. We've got a lot of question marks in the community right now, and we really want to get our arms around, just from a historical standpoint, who are we, what do we do, so forth. So we put together this survey. It collects about 90 sort of discrete data points. So there's a lot of little radio buttons and check boxes and preferences that we're collecting. From that, you can really get to hundreds of points available of deeper data, by filtering the response of product developers versus in-house developers, or by different age groups or different countries, people who use FileMaker Go more, how do they feel about Studio, things of that nature. So there's a myriad of analytics we can pull out of this. Again, it largely tracks just core stuff, demographics. Tell me about who the people are on this survey. Tell me about their usage of the product, their satisfaction of current stuff, their impressions of future stuff. We got hundreds of responses from over 20 countries. So I've been really pleased at the depth of data we've been able to collect in a relatively short period of time. For those who haven't noticed, I put in the chat a link. There's still some, you're going to see, we've got some sort of holes in terms of our data collection. It's not super even and so forth, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But if you want to distribute that to other groups, it'd be fine. Again, worked on this for days at a time and had a couple of people take a look at it and so forth. There's still some things that are imperfect. Again, the distribution model. This certainly didn't go to every single FileMaker developer in the world. It's got some, in terms of scientific perfection of the survey, yeah, we missed a few things and we asked the same question twice in different ways. So it's not perfect, but to my mind, I've never seen a more extensive survey to the community ever. I've been around a long time, and I think it's pretty objective. I think it asks, and gives people gradings that are anywhere from neutral to dissatisfied to positive and very satisfied. So I think it's not one of those, you see those surveys every once in a while. How much do you love our product? I love it a little, I love it a lot, I love it immensely. And so I think it's got a pretty good opportunity to collect data in an even fashion. I think we're not gonna surprise ourselves with some of the results you'll see today. I think it confirms a lot of what we think we know, but there are a couple of surprises in here. I think there's some things that if you really kind of cross-reference this and look at some patterns and so forth, there's actually some pretty good takeaways and surprises. Like Bob said today, really just focusing on who the people are, what do they use currently, what do they think of what they're using currently. So none of the future Claris stuff is in this particular part. And, so there, and again, we didn't do any cross-references of analytics. What's the size of your organization? Well, that's a different question if you're a solo FileMaker developer as opposed to an in-house developer who works with 3,000 people. So there's some things that we could do a little bit deeper there, but haven't got to that yet. And again, we hope to be able to share additional results of the survey. There's a lot more data here. I'm hoping to share additional results of that in future meetings. So let's jump in. Respondents, this is by country. And I think I'm going to do some here. So here's about the top, I want to say top 20, and you can kind of see these are, first 10 and the second 10 here. Let's just broad stroke tell us some things. I've had a little more time to look at this than some of you, but what are our broad stroke findings? Well, no question, a heavy skew towards the United States, right? We've got the largest by far response rate from this country. Again, lots of, the product is built in the US. We've got a really strong developer group network here and so on and so forth. So we've been able to pass this along pretty well. So that I don't think that's a surprise. Germany is a bit of a surprise. It's about three times over, third place and anything below it. So it's a really strong result there. I'm going to tell you why. I think I'm going to give you guys some impressions after I'm most of the way through the slide about that. Switzerland, who knew? To be able to say, hey, we've got three third place finish line here of respondents came from the Swiss. I didn't know there were that many FileMaker developers there, but it was significant. So these are kind of some surprises. There's a couple of more that I'll kind of ring in, but and now I want to kind of just look from a size of population. In broad strokes, Japan and Philippines are within about 7% population. They're really close as country populations. Philippines, hardly any responses. Japan, quite a few. Of course, we're looking at a developed nation versus a less developed nation and so forth. But those metrics of looking at the size of a country and how technically prevalent they are is kind of an interesting thing. One of the points that I found kind of interesting, we got, roughly the same response rate from the UK, Australia, and Austria. The UK is, twice the population of either of those other two countries. So again, is this a mechanism of we didn't distribute this as well? Or no, there's just there's a lot of Aussies and people in Austria that are FileMaker developers, and it's just really popular in that particular country. I think, historically, we've always kind of heard that about, I think 20-25% of FileMaker sales come from Japan. So we know that's a nation that has a high affinity for this platform as well. Another indication, which is sort of interesting, is you look at New Zealand, France, and Netherlands, they're kind of tightly packed in here too. Again, relatively low numbers, so the distribution might be an issue. But France is 16 times the population of New Zealand and 4 times the size of Netherlands. And those two smaller populated countries have pretty impressive, given their population. We know down in New Zealand, we've got, you've got the gentleman over, base elements. We know of some people down there that are pretty fervent FileMaker aficionados and so forth. But I kind of found these a little interesting as well. And Italy and Spain, these are, relatively populous nations and developed nations and so forth. And we've got really low sample rates or responses from that. So I don't know, that's probably due to the, like I said earlier, probably uneven distribution. Hey, let's find an Italian developer group and send out the survey to them. And that's why I resent the link today. I'd like to be able to reach into some additional corners and harvest a bit more data if possible. The other point that I mentioned earlier, when we look at Germany, Switzerland, and even Austria to some extent, and the Netherlands, these are not bad showings. I'm going to attribute that to the fact that we had that gentleman, Marcel Moret, last week, or last meeting, pardon me. We had him at our October meeting, and he's very plugged into the communities there. And I think he made a really concerted effort to distribute this. So that's probably why I'm not saying that Germany isn't potentially second, but I think he helped, kind of goose those numbers a bit in that area of Europe. And that's perhaps why we got some strong distribution there. So, so we've got that. And by the way, Bob, if anybody has, I'm going to go on to the next slide. If anybody has any, comments or questions or whatever, go ahead and field those for me, because I'm going to just kind of keep focused on my notes. So the next slide, by employment, what do people do? The people who are responding to this survey, we can see sort of their gigs here. In broad strokes, I don't think there's anything crazy here. One of the things when you do a survey, you want to make sure there's not too many miscellaneous or others. That tells you you're asking the right questions. So I think we got 6% that said other, and that's pretty strong. It means almost everybody fit into the categories provided, which means we did a pretty good job in terms of targeting. That's good. When we look at this was a bit of a surprise to me. The custom development shop. So if you're again working at Angel City or Soliant or Alchemy Group or something like that versus a solo developer, freelance or whatever, I think that this has probably changed over the years. I think there used to be smaller FileMaker shops and a lot of solo developers, and I think there's more clustering happening right now. Anecdotally, the thing that I also like, anytime you have a survey where things are evenly distributed and not a lot of, other, that also means we ask good questions. So it's interesting to see that people working at a FileMaker development shop or similar, or independents or in-house developers, that's a nice spread. So that's kind of telling us that that's a good question to ask. One thing I will point out is historically, there's always, I've seen other surveys and I've seen hand raises at conferences in the past and so forth. There always seemed to be almost a 50-50. Hey, how many people are custom developers? How many people work in-house? I think there used to be about a 50-50 split there. And this is more kind of, these are the custom shops and these are the in-house developers. And of course, we've got the turnkey folks as well. But I think historically, it used to be closer to about a 50-50 split between people working in the corporate world as FileMaker developers versus developers that are, custom development, outsourced IT, et cetera. So this may indicate something which I think I've heard enough. I've been around the block a few times with different groups of people talking about this. I think if you even talk with Claris, they'll tell you, wow, we're really strong in the SMB, that small medium business market. And I think if you are, Amgen or Disney or General Motors or whatever, I don't think we see as much FileMaker immersion in those big corporate clients. I think it's moved down more to the small and medium businesses. And I think that speaks to, if you're at Amgen and we've got, 500 FileMaker systems, we're going to have 10 on-site FileMaker programmers as in-house developers. If you are a 40 or 50 person shop, you may not need a full-time developer and can use a Howard Schlossberg or a Bob Chalky or somebody like that to kind of supplement or maintain your systems. So I kind of see this as a shift away from big corporate and more into, SMB and so forth. So that's just kind of a perception that I think this might be driven from. The respondents by position. What do people do who responded to this survey? So, obviously no big surprise that 80% are developers, right? That's who we targeted this through a number of developer groups. This option inside the survey also was not mutually exclusive. You can pick more than one option. So you could sit there and say, for myself, I'm both a developer and an executive at ACD. So this isn't, this isn't an either or, it's a pick all that apply. The 11% other, that was sort of opposite of the previous question. We've got a lot of people answering that particular spot. And the thing that I found after going through the comments on that particular question, there was no real significant pattern revealed here. It was, hey, I'm a CEO, or I'm also the IT guy, or I own the company, or I'm a firefighter. And it was a mishmash of those. So it was really people going, well, I gave you an executive position here, but you wanted to call yourself an owner or CEO. So that's, I didn't see any sort of data being revealed here that lent itself, to any sort of obscurity or thing of that nature. The respondents by age. I think this is, again, one of those anecdotal data points that we all sort of feel. If you've been to a FileMaker developer conference over the last few times you had it, a lot of silver hair in the audience, and I think we kind of already know that. So one of the things that I found, I did a little bit of research, and there's a couple of different surveys or quotes you can grab here, but one point of reference says that the average software developer, this has nothing to do with FileMaker, the average software developer in the world generally is between 25 and 34. When you look at the FileMaker platform, number one, there's nothing below that in our respondents. Number two, that's only 4% of our respondents here. So if we're able to look at this, we're saying, wow, FileMaker developers trend much older than what are the average. One of the other really interesting things is, when you look at that younger group of 25 to 34, we have almost the same amount of developers in what should be an average age range. We have almost that much with our old timers, those that are still developing FileMaker at 75 plus. So that's a pretty interesting demographic, and it should be a bit concerning as well, right? Because that demographic is not gonna it's not going to continue to add. It's going to start subtracting at some point. One of the things that it does tell us, matter of fact, I'll get to this next slide here, which really kind of says it all. 95% of all FileMaker, developers that answered this survey are over 35. And again, if we tighten that up, you'd say, wow, it's almost, over 45 is really the largest segment there. I think the good part about this question, I think it shows that we've got outstanding retention of the project, right? People who touched this thing 20, 30 years ago or what have you, I don't think we attracted brand new 65-year-old developers to the platform. I think they've been in the platform for years and have stayed with it. So that retention, such a huge asset to a software platform, right? To be able to keep your developer pool around as long as you have, such a treasure when you've got your smart sheets and Airtables and folks that are trying to attract, people more in this demographic. So there's a lot of room for Claris, I think. I think there's a lot of room for Claris to improve this. Again, if we were to talk about what everybody is talking about, that freemium, how do you get this into the hands of those people who are going to eventually grow into long-term developers? I think we already know that. We've seen an abandonment of FileMaker and the platform in any sort of educational institutions. I think if you, like Marc alluded to earlier, I think if people go knocking on the door and go, what is it to get into this and play $540? I think that's a huge barrier to dissuade young developers. Young developers have less money than old developers, right? So I think that's a big hurdle to growth. I think the freemium thing, we've been talking, I raised my hand at a DevCon Platinum Lunch in 2015 and said, guys, we need a premium thing. 2 years ago on the Share Voice, I said, guys, we need a premium thing. This is something that I think they're finally starting to kind of move on right now. So I look forward to seeing how we can open the doors to this platform and attract more developers. Because again, when you get them, they tend to stay for a while. And we're going to see more of that in just a second. This is a cross-reference here. How many years in business? So again, a very interesting reveal of, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, these are 5-year segments. This jumps up, to a 10-year slot. And of course, all that. So we don't have things dissected as tightly as we could. But one thing that's of significant note, 48% are over 25 years, right? This is an interesting thing too. Again, when I talk about doing that filtering and weighting, we're looking at people who are saying, I'm an in-house developer, I work at a development shop, or I work in-house. So if I'm working for Procter & Gamble as their FileMaker developer, and the company's been around for 100 years, that's the kind of thing where filtering out just, the custom developer shops and product developers and so forth probably would be a tighter revelation on this, but still significant when you look at the amount of retention, again, of this platform. 75% of the respondents are over 15 years. That's immensely amazing. I mean, again, in terms of that retention, so it's something to be said. There's on the other side of that, if you've got 75%, then you've got this. When you look at the years in business and say, wow, we don't have anything much, not as much to share here, that really goes back to, you got to roll back the clock and go, hey, right around 2007, if we're going to go back 10, 15 years, things started dropping off. And so it might be interesting to look at the technology platforms of the day 15 years ago. Was this when things started moving to the web? Was Salesforce kind of already coming up? Were there other products or platforms that ate into this? What was the cause of that? And part of that could be market conditions. And part of it could also be, again, is this about the time that Claris raised the ability to work with a cheaper version or a single user version? Would freemium have helped this? Would staying in schools have helped this? Time will tell. But it is an interesting drop off when you see how heavy the old timers are, the businesses that have been using it for years versus, again, in a relatively short period there. Total staff. Again, this one filtering out by in-house, if you're working, again, if you're at Disney and you're a FileMaker developer and there's 8,000 people there, you're going to stack here. But again, 80% of the folks who answered this were developers. We get a bit of what I call a barbell when you look at these trends. We've got a lot at the bottom and a lot at the top and a kind of a skinny bar between them in terms. So, if we're saying most of the respondents to this survey were developers either working at a shop or freelance, we can go, wow, almost 60%. 80% are either under 5 or over 25. So that's an interesting thing. There's a lot of relatively small businesses that are using FileMaker. And again, we could get into some really interesting looks by going, how many of the large shops have been in business for a longer time, or who have been in business for a small time but had more meteoric growth? There's a couple of things we could look at there. And then how many years have people been using the Claris product platform? The average software, if you just go out, I just Googled, hey, what's the average software lifespan or whatever? And I think it's 6 to 8 years. So if somebody buys, a platform or buys a product to run their business or whatever, I think it's something like 6 to 8 years. The FileMaker platform, 85% of the respondents have been using the product for 10 years or more. So again, what I was saying earlier, the meat hooks are into this platform. The developers in this platform are rabid. They stayed loyal to the product all these years. They're trending on the older side. So we need to do some things about helping to introduce some youth and growth on the bottom end to this platform, I think. But that's still a pretty formidable model to sit there and say, wow, there's a lot of established shops that have been using it for many years, especially given what we see when we talk about other software retentions and so forth. Total users supported. This is kind of a fun one. Guess what? FileMaker Pro ain't nobody not using it, right? Of the respondents here, you go, yeah, that's just nothing. I don't know how they could use it without FileMaker Pro, but okay, we downloaded a FileMaker Go template and use it on my iPad. 80% of the respondents support anywhere from 1 to 500 users. I think that's, if a small development shop and I got 20 customers and each has 10 users or whatever, that's what you kind of probably generally see. So I think that's pretty expected. FileMaker Go, 18% of the respondents don't use it at all. And it's not used very widely for those that do have it. Yeah, we have people that have 1 to 50 users total. So if, let's just say I'm John Doe and I support 10 users or 10 customers and they have 20 users each, that's 200 users, but only 5 of each of those user groups touch FileMaker Go. So it's not widely used. We see a pretty solid assessment here, but there's not many people who are supporting like over 1,000 Go users. So there's some room for improvement there. WebDirect, 75% of the respondents, again, 30% aren't using it at all, and 75 are 0 to 50. So not as anywhere near as supported. You can look at, again, this but you can also look here and go, it's not as supported. And of course, or in terms of the number of users, right? The number of users tends towards the small side. We have a couple of firms that support over 1,000 WebDirect users, and so forth, but not a lot of very high-end total support of users in that fashion. FileMaker server, we're not going to have any surprise here. And guess what? It's really within 2 to 5 points of how many people we support with Pro, right? So we have, 40% of the respondents have about 50 users they support. It's relatively close to how many people on FileMaker Pro or server. So you can see this really just sort of acts in a supporting role to how many clients are out there. I'm gonna try to get this thing done. Claris Connect, ouch. This is not a good story. This is not a good look. 88%, almost 90% don't use it at all. That's not a success. This is an absolute where you go, wow, this thing has been available. It's a community that knows about the product, obviously has it available to them, and largely doesn't use it. And of course, we're seeing minuscule. In terms of the ones that are using it, it's a relatively small amount of supported users here, and hardly anybody supporting anything of significance with this. So that's a bit of a stink bomb there. Custom web publishing, most of the developers responding to this, 60% don't use it. There's a little bit of, distribution here and so forth. And if it is being used, it's generally, the grand total of users that we support is relatively small there. And now we're getting to satisfaction. To give you a sense also on satisfaction, a good consumer product score of satisfaction, 75% or higher is considered good. So I don't think we're going to have any sort of surprise here. FileMaker Pro, 91% satisfaction of the respondents. This is the golden calf. The product here this is why people use this platform. FileMaker Pro, it's incredibly widely used by the respondents here and incredibly well liked. So that's something that's good to take away. FileMaker Go, we've got, we're below that 75% mark. Again, if we did cross analysis of how many people are using it and of those who like it, we can get some different looks at this data, but 65%. WebDirect, 23% say they don't use it, 42% satisfaction rate, for anybody that's satisfied somewhat or very. So we're kind of sinking down there in terms of overall product satisfaction on that. FileMaker server, of course, we bounce back up above that 75% mark, which is good. Again, I think we spend more time in FileMaker Pro composing and so forth, and so we have a much friendlier relationship with that product. Server, I think we put it away for, unless you're Wim and you sleep with server all day and all night, I think most of us basically jump in to do work and get out. Claris Connect, again, based on our last slide, no big surprises there. 80%, slightly different, asking a different question here, but 80% don't use it. And very satisfied or somewhat satisfied. Of course, we would have to skew that to say of the ones that are using it. But when you compare this against some of the others here, it's not a very positive experience, at least what we're seeing here. So that's something that should be a bit of concern. And then we get to FileMaker Cloud. Most of the respondents, significantly, almost 3/4, don't use it. And again, it's got about, an 8% out of this summary, about an 8% satisfaction rate, which ironically is about 10% of what FileMaker Server is. So what does this tell us? It's like, wow, FileMaker Server is way more liked than FileMaker Cloud is. So an interesting takeaway. Custom web publishing, not widely used, right? There's only about 58% say they don't use it, but the people who do use it, have a bit higher satisfaction rate than some of the other unused or less used products here, right? So this certainly, you know, we're still not apples to apples, but we're also at a much higher satisfaction rate there. One of the other takeaways that if you know, when I start analyzing this, I start thinking about different ways of thinking of this. You know, the older products at FileMaker are the ones that have the highest satisfaction rate. The newer products in general, if you were to say, you know, Connect, Cloud, et cetera, even Go to some extent, have a slightly less thing. So it's an interesting to note that adoption and satisfaction rate is different. I also think when talking about WebDirect, you know, WebDirect is a way for FileMaker developers to use the skill sets they already have and promote things to the web. I think that's got to satisfy. It's certainly not what I would call a better experience for the end users, but it is. It's easier for the developers, and therefore the satisfaction may be, I like working in WebDirect. Custom web publishing is much more difficult, but the user satisfaction, you know, there are some pitfalls and things you can't do with WebDirect that you can with custom. So again, I think there's some ways of looking at, are you a 70-year-old FileMaker developer that doesn't know how to program PHP or JavaScript, in which case WebDirect is a higher satisfaction rate for you. But there are some things that we could do to look at that sort of stuff. So that's sort of it. We're kind of running a tiny bit late on time here. I haven't been able to read through any of the comments here, but I'm happy to field any questions or anecdotes or comments from anybody.
I pasted a couple things into the chat. I thought 2 of the really high don't use it numbers, specifically with Claris Cloud and Claris Connect, had a strong correlation with botched launches. Claris Cloud, and especially Claris Cloud 2, launched with a stripped down feature set. So we didn't even have feature parity. And so it's not a surprise at all that people would not have good uptake on that stuff. And so the custom web publishing, I think, is a different animal. It's been around forever, you know, so that's gone through a bunch of evolutions over the years. But, you know, if you sort of track that, the actual satisfaction number against who is actually using it, you're at 50%, which isn't terrible.
Right. I didn't get a chance to read through. Any other questions? If anybody wants to raise a question or ask additional, let me know.
No real questions, Dave, just some comments.
I think that's all I have. So Bob, back to you.
All right, thanks, Dave. That was really insightful and useful information. I think it's really good for us all to kind of know who's doing what with what compared to ourselves. So a few little surprises in there, interesting stuff. All right, well, that wraps things up for today. Thank you to all of our presenters, Marc, Keith, Wim, Dave, all great having you here. And contact Barry Isaacson if you have anything that you'd like to talk about in the next meeting. We'll have the recording up in a couple of days on our YouTube channel. So if you missed anything or you want to share it with someone else, it'll be there. And goodbye. See you all on December 9th for our next FMDiSC meeting.
Okay.
Bye all. Happy Thanksgiving to the Americans.
Bye now.
Happy holidays.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.